Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Monkey D. FIC. Presenting to you today, What If Luffy Had Thor's Lightning Powers? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1. The God and the Rubber Boy. The village of Shell's Town smelled like salt and low tide and the particular kind of fear that settles into a place when nobody powerful enough to stop the bad things has shown up yet. Luffy noticed the smell of the food first. He was hanging from the marine base's flagpole by his stretched arms, swinging in lazy arcs over the courtyard below while the soldiers yelled at him and pointed their rifles upward like that was going to accomplish something meaningful. The smell coming from the kitchens inside the base was incredible. Something with pork, he was almost certain, and rice, and maybe something sweet underneath all of it, and he was so focused on cataloging the individual components that he almost missed the sound of the whip. Almost. The crack of it split the afternoon air like a gunshot, and Luffy turned his head toward the sound on pure instinct. Below him, past the ring of soldiers still arguing about who was supposed to shoot the boy on the flagpole, a man in a marine captain's coat was walking across the courtyard with the unhurried arrogance of someone who never had a reason to hurry. He was tall, built like a man who'd spent years deciding that cruelty was a form of discipline, with pale eyes that moved across the courtyard the way a boot moves across an anthill, without particular malice, just absolute indifference to what got crushed. Captain Morgan. Luffy had heard the name from the townspeople when he'd first pulled himself ashore, soaking wet and cheerful, asking where the food was and also whether anyone knew a swordsman tied to a post somewhere nearby. The whip cracked again. Not at the soldiers. At the small group of townspeople who'd been brought inside the gates. Luffy counted 6 of them, 3 adults and 3 kids, all of them on their knees in the dirt, and the sound of it made something shift in the air around him, something electric and distant, like the feeling right before a storm you can't see yet. Luffy let go of the flagpole. He dropped 60 feet in a straight line and hit the courtyard stones feet first with a boom that sent the nearest ring of soldiers stumbling backward. He straightened up slowly, brushing his hands on his shorts, and looked at Morgan with the calm, level attention of someone who had just decided something and wasn't going to be talked out of it. "Hey," he said. "Stop that." Morgan stared at him. Then, with the particular contempt of a man who had not been spoken to like that in years, he smiled. "Kill him!" The rifles came up. Luffy stretched his neck to the side, watching them, and then he sighed through his nose the way he did when a situation was taking longer than it needed to. "Goma goma no!" He stretched one arm back 50 feet, locked his hand around the flagpole, and used the recoil to launch himself forward through the line of soldiers like a human cannonball, scattering them across the courtyard in a sprawling, shouting heap. He landed in front of Morgan and straightened up again, closer this time, close enough that the captain had to tilt his head back slightly to maintain the eye contact he was clearly determined not to lose. "You should probably run," Luffy told him, not unkindly. Morgan's hand came up and the axe blade attached to his arm, which Luffy had registered as weird but had been too focused on other things to fully process, swung in a wide arc at Luffy's neck. The blade passed through his rubber neck like a hand through smoke and Morgan stumbled forward with the momentum of a swing that had connected with nothing. Luffy hit him once. Flat palm, center of the chest, the kind of clean straight impact that didn't feel like much while it was happening and felt like a great deal immediately afterward. Morgan left the ground by roughly 4 feet and came down in a heap against the base's stone wall, where he slid down it and sat with the unfocused eyes of a man who had briefly visited somewhere else. The soldiers stared. The townspeople stared. Luffy turned around and looked at the townspeople. "You're okay now," he said. "Someone should probably untie the swordsman too." His name was Roronoa Zoro and he was, in Luffy's assessment, extremely cool. He was also extremely unhappy about the situation, which mostly manifested as a flat, dangerous quiet that made the marine soldiers give him wide berth even now, even after Luffy had cut his bindings with a knife he'd taken from one of the unconscious soldiers in the courtyard. Zoro stood in the middle of that courtyard with his 3 swords sheathed and his arms folded, and the particular expression of a man who had been tied to a post for weeks and was currently deciding how many people he was going to cut in half before he felt better about it. "I didn't need saving," he said. "You were tied to a post," Luffy said. "I was handling it." "You were tied to a post," Luffy said again, with the tone of someone who considered this to be a complete and comprehensive rebuttal. Zoro looked at him for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, not softening, exactly, but recalibrating, the way a compass adjusts when it gets closer to true north. "What do you want?" he said. It wasn't really a question. "You're the pirate hunter Zoro, right? The one who's going to be the world's greatest swordsman?" "That's right." "Good," Luffy said, and grinned. "I'm going to be king of the pirates. You should be my first mate." The silence that followed had a specific texture to it, the texture of a man who had heard something both completely absurd and, somewhere deep in the chest where logic didn't live, completely correct. "No," Zoro said. "Okay," Luffy said easily. "Do you want food first?" "I smell pork." They ate in the base's kitchen while the town outside slowly began to process that Captain Morgan was no longer a going concern. The cook had fled, which Luffy considered a waste, but the pork had been left half-finished on the stove, and he was not above completing someone else's work. Zoro ate in the focused, methodical way of a man who'd been given nothing but water for weeks. Neither of them talked much while the food was in front of them, which Luffy respected about him. It was Zoro who spoke first, eventually, pushing his empty bowl aside and leaning back on the bench with his arms crossed. "You took down Morgan by yourself? He wasn't that strong," Luffy said through a mouthful of rice. "He's a Marine captain. He's held this town for 3 years. Luffy shrugged. "He was hurting people who couldn't fight back. That's not strength. That's just being mean." He said it the way he said most things, like it was obvious, like there wasn't really more to discuss on the subject. Zoro watched him. "How'd you do that thing with your neck?" "With the axe." Luffy swallowed his rice and tapped the side of his own neck. "Ate a devil fruit. Gum fruit. I'm a rubber man." "You're a rubber man." "Yeah. So you can't swim." "Yeah. And you're going to be Pirate King?" "Yeah." Another silence. Then Zoro reached across the table and picked up a piece of pork from the communal pot, which Luffy had not been offering to share, and ate it. "What happened to your hat?" he asked. Luffy's hand went automatically to the brim of the red straw hat, adjusting it on his head. "Someone gave it to me," he said. The lightness went out of his voice, just briefly, just enough for something real to show through. "A long time ago. I'm going to give it back when I'm Pirate King." Zoro looked at the hat. Then he looked at Luffy's face, which was open and young and carried the particular kind of certainty that wasn't arrogance because arrogance knows it might be wrong. This was something else. This was the certainty of a compass pointing north. "Fine," he said. Luffy looked up. "Fine? I'll be your first mate. But I have conditions." "Sure. Don't ever tell me which way to point my sword." "Okay. And if you ever do something that gets in the way of me becoming the greatest swordsman in the world, I won't," Luffy said simply. Another long moment. Zoro nodded once, the way men nod when they've made a decision they intend to keep. "Okay," he said. "Where's your ship?" "I don't have one yet." Zoro stared at him. "You're the worst pirate in the world." "I have a barrel," Luffy offered. They found Nami 2 days later, or rather she found them, which was the kind of distinction that mattered a great deal to her, and not at all to Luffy. She was running from 3 men twice her size through the back alleys of a port town when she rounded a corner and nearly collided with Luffy, who was standing in the middle of the alley eating a banana and looking at a ship in the harbor with the focused intensity of a man doing important nautical assessment. She grabbed his vest without slowing down. "Move," she said. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Away from them." She pointed behind her at the 3 men, who'd rounded the corner and stopped, apparently recalibrating upon finding a woman holding onto a boy in a straw hat. Luffy looked at the men. The men looked at Luffy. Zoro, leaning against the alley wall with his arms folded, looked at all of them with the expression of a man who had been standing here eating an apple and resented the interruption. "Those your friends?" Luffy asked Nami. "No," she said in the tone of someone who felt the question was somewhat missing the point. "Okay." He handed her the rest of his banana, walked down the alley toward the three men, and dealt with them in about 45 seconds with no particular fuss and barely any property damage. Then he walked back, took the banana back, and finished it. Nami stared at him. Then she stared at Zoro. "Is he always like that?" "Unfortunately," Zoro said. "I like ships," Luffy said, looking back at the harbor. "That one's nice. Can you sail?" Nami opened her mouth. Closed it. "Yes," she said because she was a practical person. "But I'm not joining your crew." "Okay," he said in the tone of a man who filed this information away but assigned it approximately 0 weight. She stole their ship 3 days later, which Luffy found mostly impressive, and he chased her across half of East Blue before she came back on her own terms for reasons that had nothing to do with him directly but everything to do with what he was willing to do for the people he'd decided were his. That part came later. For now she was the navigator, she was angry about it on principle, and she was the best sailor Luffy had ever met, which was convenient because she was also the only one. Usopp joined them in a burst of noise and enthusiasm and lies so obviously false that they circled back around to being charming. He gave them a ship. The Going Merry was small and white and had a sheep figurehead, and Luffy loved it immediately with the wholehearted totality with which he loved most things he'd decided to love. The 4 of them sailed out of East Blue on a morning where the sky was the particular blue that happens when summer is burning the last of itself out, and Luffy sat on the figurehead with his legs dangling and his hat pulled down against the wind and felt, in the wordless way he understood most important things, that this was the beginning. It happened on their 7th day at sea. They'd been moving along the southern edge of East Blue, following Nami's charts toward the reverse mountain, when the other ship appeared. It was flying no flag, which was itself a flag of sorts, a statement about operating outside the normal structures of piracy in ways that even other pirates tended to find uncomfortable. The ship was large, built for war rather than for speed, with reinforced iron on the hull and ballistae mounted along both railings. The kind of ship that didn't need to be fast because nothing it hunted was fast enough to escape it. The man who stood at the prow was named Keel. Luffy learned this when Keel shouted it across the water between their ships, along with his bounty, 8 million belly, which he announced the way some men announce their own name, as though the number was indistinguishable from the person, and a summary of his intentions, which amounted to taking everything on the Mary and throwing the crew into the ocean. "No thank you," Luffy called back. Keel stared across the water at the boy in the straw hat standing on a sheep figurehead, and appeared to experience a moment of genuine bafflement. Then he laughed, a real laugh, not a performance, just genuine amusement at the answer, and signaled his crew. The ballistae fired. Luffy stretched both arms wide and caught the bolts before they hit the ship, one in each hand, holding them with the effortless grip of a rubber body that didn't care about force. He looked at the bolts in his hands. Then he looked at Keel's ship. Then he threw them back, which was technically within the rules as he understood them. The bolts punched through Keel's railing and embedded in the mast, and suddenly the amusement on Keel's face had a sharper, more dangerous quality, the kind of expression that appeared when someone's entertainment became a real problem. "Board them," he said. They came over the railing on ropes, 20 men or more, spreading across the Mary's deck. Zoro's swords were out before they'd finished landing, and the next 30 seconds were the organized chaos of a real close-quarters fight, men shouting, steel ringing, the specific percussion of Luffy's fists making contact with chests and jaws at high speed. Nami was in the rigging doing something with the sails that didn't look like fleeing so much as repositioning, reading the wind for the moment when fleeing became viable. Usopp was firing from behind a barrel and hitting, with great accuracy, the parts of enemy bodies that produced the most noise and the least actual injury. It was fine. It was the normal shape of things, the familiar rhythm Luffy had learned to move inside of, and then Keel himself came over the railing with a weapon that wasn't a sword. It was a rod. Iron, 4 feet long, and wrapped in some substance that crackled with a faint blue light. See prism stone wrapped in something conductive, a combination that someone knowledgeable and cruel had clearly spent time designing. When the rod made contact with Luffy's arm, the rubber absorbed the impact, but the sea prism stone component was something else entirely, something that didn't interact with rubber or physics or normal rules. Luffy felt his legs go out from under him. The devil fruit's connection to his body felt like it was pulling back, like tide going out, and he hit the deck on one knee with the jarring wrongness of weakness in a body that was built not to feel it. Keel stood over him, and the amusement on his face was back, but it was cold now, the way fire is cold when it's been burning long enough to turn to ash. 8 million belly didn't come from being stupid, he said. He raised the rod. Luffy heard Nami shout his name from the rigging. He heard the sharp intake of breath from Zoro, who was 3 men deep on the other side of the deck and couldn't get there in time and knew it. He felt the sea prism's wrongness moving through him like cold water, numbing the places where his power lived, and underneath that wrongness he felt something else. Something that had never been there before. Or no. That wasn't quite right. It had always been there. It had been there the whole time, in the same way a storm is there before the clouds arrive, in the pressure, in the stillness, in the way the air sits differently when something enormous is building in it. Luffy had felt it occasionally, in flashes, a crackle along his skin when he was angry, a charge in his palms when he held his arms back for a big punch, a smell like lightning before the rain came. He'd never had a name for it. He'd never thought to wonder. Now it woke up. It didn't feel like the rubber. The rubber was comfortable, familiar, the elastic joy of a body that bounced when the world pushed it. This was different. This was something that didn't want to bounce. This was something that wanted to answer. The rod came down. The lightning came up. Not from the rod. Not from the sky. The sky was clear and blue and had nothing to do with it. From Luffy, from the place between his spine and his sternum where something had just decided it was done waiting. It came out of him in a single vertical crack of white-blue light, a column of it, striking upward from his body and hitting nothing, dissipating into the clear air above the ship in a thunderclap that was so loud and so close that every person on the Mary's deck stumbled backward at the sound of it. Keel stumbled too. The rod was gone, not broken, just launched, spinning away over the railing and into the water by the force of the discharge. He was on his back with his hands pressed to his ears and his eyes wide and the particular expression of a man whose very ordered worldview had just sustained serious structural damage. Luffy stood up. He did it slowly, not because he needed to be slow, but because his body was learning something in real time, and it needed a moment to process the lesson. He looked at his hands. They were crackling. Tiny arcs of blue-white electricity danced between his fingers, leaping from knuckle to knuckle, and where they touched his rubber skin they moved differently than they would have moved on anything else. They didn't burn, they collected, pooling in his palms like water in cupped hands. "Oh," he said. It was such a completely Luffy thing to say, in such a completely Luffy tone, the low, wondering discovery of a child who has just found something extraordinary in their pocket, that Nami, hanging in the rigging above with her knuckles white on the rope, let out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something else. "Luffy," Zoro said, from across the deck. His voice was careful and level in the way it got when he was paying very close attention. "What is that?" "I don't know," Luffy said, watching the lightning play between his fingers. "Can you do it again?" Luffy thought about it. He thought about the cold of the sea prism and the sound of Nami's voice and the way Keel had stood over him with that cold fire smile. The lightning surged in his palms and the air around him crackled and tasted like rain. "Yeah," he said. Keel scrambled to his feet. His 20 men had stopped fighting. Zoro and Usopp were watching Luffy, and Keel's men were watching Luffy, and everybody was standing in the particular frozen attention of people who have understood simultaneously that the situation has fundamentally changed and that they do not yet know what that means for them specifically. Keel was afraid. Luffy could see it, the way he could see most things about people, not through any particular cleverness but through the unclouded attention he gave to anyone who was in front of him. The man's face was doing the specific work of not showing what it was showing, which was fear, and also the calculation that comes from fear when the person doing the fearing is smart enough to do the calculation. "What are you?" Keel said. Luffy looked up from his hands. "I'm Monkey D. Luffy," he said. "I'm going to be king of the pirates." "That's not an answer to what I asked." "I know," Luffy said, and grinned. He moved. Later, Zoro would describe what happened next as the most efficient fight he'd ever witnessed, and Zoro was someone who thought about efficiency the way architects think about load-bearing walls, with a deep practical appreciation for what happened when you got it right. Luffy crossed the deck in 2 steps and hit Keel in the chest with a right hand that had every ounce of his rubber band launch behind it, and a current running through it that turned the impact into something more like a detonation. Keel went back over his own railing. The splash was impressive. Keel's men looked at the space where Keel had been, then looked at Luffy, then made various sounds of professional recalibration, and the fight ended approximately 30 seconds after that. Luffy stood at the railing and watched Keel's ship's crew pull their captain out of the water and make extremely rapid decisions about the tactical wisdom of a second engagement. The ship turned. It moved away at its best speed, which wasn't fast enough to look dignified but was fast enough to look conclusive. Luffy watched them go, his hands still crackling faintly, the sky above the Mary somehow darker and more electric feeling than it had been 20 minutes ago, as though the air itself had taken a note. He heard Nami drop from the rigging to the deck behind him. Then Usopp, who landed badly and swore under his breath. Then Zoro's footsteps, different from the others, that specific unhurried rhythm. "So," Nami said. "So," Luffy agreed. "You have lightning. Looks like it." "You didn't know about this." "No. You have never once, in the entire time we have known each other, mentioned having lightning." "I didn't know," Luffy said again. He looked at his hands. The crackling was fading now, settling back into whatever deep place it lived, but he could still feel it there, banked embers, breathing quietly in his chest. "I felt something sometimes. Before. Like when you're near a really big storm and you can feel it before you see it. But it never actually came out before." "What changed?" Usopp asked. He was hovering at a slightly greater radius than the others, a distance that was scientifically calibrated to look casual, while still being safely out of the blast zone. Luffy thought about it. He thought about the sea prism stone and the cold weakness of it, and Keel standing over him, and Nami's voice, sharp and scared, calling his name from the rigging. "I got mad," he said. Silence. "Right," Zoro said. He had that look on his face, not surprise. Zoro very rarely looked surprised, but something more like a chess player studying a board and seeing a move they hadn't anticipated. "So what can you do with it?" "Don't know yet," Luffy said. He grinned, the full grin, the one that took up most of his face and meant he'd discovered something wonderful. "Want to find out?" "No," Nami said immediately. "Not on my ship. Not right now. We're sitting on a wooden ship in the middle of open water, and you are apparently a lightning rod with a body count, so we are going to table the experiments until we are on land and preferably until I am at a reasonable distance." She pointed at the horizon. "And we are going to head toward the Grand Line now, before anyone else decides they want to be Keel's replacement." She went back to the helm, walking with the particular posture of someone who was absolutely fine and had definitely not just been frightened on a fundamental level and was choosing not to discuss it. Luffy watched her go. Then he turned back to the horizon, leaning his elbows on the railing. The Mary rocked gently in the wake of Keel's departure. The sky was going orange at the edges, late afternoon burning down toward evening. "Hey Zoro," Luffy said. "What? You still want to be first mate? Now that you know?" Zoro looked at him. Really looked, the measured, unhurried attention of someone who said things the way he cut things, cleanly, once, without needing to repeat himself. "Yeah," he said. "More than before, actually." Luffy nodded, satisfied. He pulled his hat down against the wind and looked at the horizon with the specific contentment of a person who was exactly where they were supposed to be. Below his skin, the lightning rested, warm as banked coals, patient as the sea. It had been sleeping for a long time. It was done sleeping now. That night, Usopp found Luffy sitting on the figurehead in the dark, his legs dangling over the water, the night sky enormous and cloudless above them. He wasn't doing anything in particular, just sitting, the way Luffy sometimes sat when he was thinking, which happened more than people who didn't know him assumed. "You okay?" Usopp asked. He said it casually, the voice he used for things that weren't casual. "Yeah," Luffy said. "That was a lot. Today." "Yeah." Usopp settled himself on the figurehead next to Luffy, with the care of a person who had no sea legs whatsoever, and was working very hard not to fall into the ocean. "Does it hurt? The lightning?" "No," Luffy said. He held up one hand, palm up, and concentrated, not very hard, just enough, and a small arc of blue-white electricity jumped between his index finger and his thumb, crackling in the dark like a tiny captured storm. It illuminated his face from below, and he was grinning at it with pure, uncomplicated wonder, the face of a boy who has just discovered that his pocket contains the entire sky. "It feels like, when you're really happy? Like something's trying to come out of your chest?" "Yeah," Usopp said. "Like that," Luffy said. "But also like thunder." Usopp looked at the small lightning between Luffy's fingers for a long time. Then he said, with great conviction, "That's the coolest thing I've ever seen." Luffy laughed, the big laugh, the one that shook his whole body, and the tiny lightning jumped and scattered and disappeared, and in the dark above the Going Merry, one of the stars was momentarily, impossibly brighter, as though the sky had laughed back. "You're going to be scary," Usopp said. "You know that, right? Like, actually scary. To people who matter." "I don't want to be scary," Luffy said. "You don't get to decide that." Luffy thought about it. Then he pulled his hat down and settled back, looking at the stars. "As long as I can still be me," he said. "I don't care how scary it gets." Far ahead of them, past the horizon, past the line between East Blue and everything else, the Grand Line waited, ancient and violent and full of every extraordinary thing the world had decided to keep in one place. Somewhere in those waters, a throne no one had ever actually sat on waited for the person who had what it took to claim it. Luffy didn't care about the throne. He cared about the sea. He cared about the crew sleeping below him, Zoro already down with the uncomplicated sleep of someone who'd cleared his conscience by making a decision, Nami staying up late over her charts because she couldn't help it, Usopp here beside him making everything lighter by existing. He cared about the horizon. He pulled his knees up, wrapped his arms around them, and looked at the dark water ahead, and the lightning in his chest settled into a rhythm that matched the rocking of the ship, patient and constant, like a second heartbeat he hadn't known he was missing until now. The Going Merry sailed on. Somewhere in the cloud-dark sky above them, a single bolt of heat lightning split the horizon, quick and distant and bright, and was gone. Chapter 2, Thunder over the Grand Line. The reverse mountain was exactly as insane as Nami's charts had promised, and nothing like she'd mentally prepared for. She'd prepared for a mountain. She'd prepared for the mechanics of it, the 4 sea currents that converged at the base, the impossible upward river that carried ships to the Grand Line's entrance, the drop on the other side. She had it all charted. She'd reviewed the charts 3 times the previous night with the focused intensity of someone who believed that if you understood a thing completely enough on paper, it couldn't surprise you in person. The reverse mountain disagreed. It took the Merry and its current like a hand picking up a toy boat and simply carried them upward, which was wrong in every instinctual sense the human body possessed, the ocean running vertical with the cheerful indifference of natural law, and Nami gripped the helm and read the current with her whole body, feeling the water through the wheel, making adjustments that were more instinct than calculation because there was no time for calculation at this speed. The mountain roared around them. Spray hit the deck in sheets. Usopp was somewhere behind her making a noise that was technically screaming but had evolved past fear into something more like religious experience. Zoro was standing at the bow, arms at his sides, watching the mountain walls rush past with an expression of mild professional interest. Luffy was on the figurehead, arms spread wide, laughing. The laugh carried over the roar of the water, bright and enormous, and Nami gritted her teeth because she could not afford to smile right now. She was navigating a vertical river on a ship the size of a very small building. This was not the time. She smiled anyway. They crested the mountain at dawn, the Mary catching air for one breathless, weightless moment before the Grand Line side caught them and the descent began, controlled, riding the current down into a sea that was immediately, obviously different from East Blue. The water was a deeper blue, almost violet in the early light. The air was heavier, dense with something that pressed against the skin like the atmosphere itself was paying closer attention. 3 islands were visible on the horizon simultaneously, each of them a different shape, a different weather pattern sitting above each one like they'd been assigned by different gods. Luffy looked at all 3 and pointed at the one on the left, which had what appeared to be a thunderstorm sitting directly over it. "That one," he said. "That one has a thunderstorm over it," Nami said. "I know," he said and grinned. She looked at his face, then at the clouds over the island, and sighed in the specific way she'd developed for situations where Luffy was making a decision that was both completely inexplicable and somehow exactly correct. "Fine," she said. Left. They didn't reach the island that day. The other ship found them at mid-morning, when the sun was high enough to throw good shadows and the sea had settled into the long, rhythmic swells of open water that Nami had learned meant deceptively good conditions. She spotted the sails first, 3 masts, a big vessel, moving on an intercept course with the particular directional confidence of a ship that knew exactly where it was going and that where it was going was here. The flag it flew was a skull with a crown of swords. "That's the Iron Ring," Usopp said from the crow's nest, his voice carrying the specific weight of someone who just checked a mental file cabinet and found something alarming. He slid down to the deck and approached Nami's position at the helm with the rapid movement of a man delivering urgent information. "The Iron Ring pirates. Captain Aldrich. He's got a bounty of 42 million belly and he's been operating in the first half of the Grand Line for 6 years. They take ships. The crew, the cargo, everything. No survivors." Everyone absorbed this. 42 million, Zoro said, not particularly alarmed by it, but noting it the way he noted all important numbers. "No survivors," Nami said, with the flat specific emphasis of someone underlining the most relevant part. "They heard about Luffy," Usopp continued, now clearly trying to determine the most useful way to present this information. "I heard some dock talk back in Logue Town, something about a rubber boy in East Blue who threw lightning, and apparently word travels faster in the Grand Line than it has any right to. A few crews have been talking. Some are scared. Some think it's exaggerated. And some—" he looked at the approaching ship. "Some apparently decided they want it." Luffy, sitting on a coil of rope eating dried meat, looked up. "Want what?" "The power," Nami said. "Your power. They think if they capture you they can—" She stopped, because she wasn't entirely sure how she thought they imagined that worked, and Usopp's expression suggested he wasn't entirely sure either. "They want leverage, at minimum." Luffy looked at the Iron Ring ship. He looked at it the way he looked at most things, completely openly, without the guarded sideways assessment that most people employed. Just direct, uncomplicated attention. "How many crew does he have?" 60, maybe 70, Usopp said. "Okay." Luffy stood up, brushed the dried meat off his vest, and settled his hat. "Zoro." "Already here," Zoro said, from approximately 2 feet to Luffy's right, because he had been standing there for the last 30 seconds in the manner of someone who had already made all necessary preparations. The Iron Ring moved into hailing distance, and Aldrich appeared at his prow. He was a man built like a siege weapon, tall and broad with close-cropped gray hair and a face that had taken many years of violence and converted it all into something colder and more purposeful than anger. He wore iron bracers on both forearms, real iron, heavy and dull, not for show, And he held no weapon because he was the kind of man who communicated through posture that he was himself the weapon. "The rubber boy," he said. His voice carried easily across the water, a practiced voice, used to being heard. "You've made good time from East Blue." "You know who I am," Luffy said. "Everyone on the Grand Line knows who you are by now." A pause. "Or who they think you are. A boy with a devil fruit and a trick." He said it without dismissal, the way a professional assesses a variable. "I want to know if the rest of it's true." "The lightning." "The lightning." Luffy tilted his head. "What if it is?" "Then you're either the most valuable thing I've found in 6 years," Aldrich said, "or the most dangerous. I haven't decided which." A thin pause. "Come aboard. Talk. We don't need to do this the other way." "I'm not coming aboard your ship," Luffy said. "Then I'll come to yours." "I don't want you on my ship either." Aldrich was quiet for a moment. Below him, along the iron ring's railing, Nami could count heads, 58, 60, it was hard to tell, all of them armed and watching and waiting with the attentive patience of a crew that had been doing this long enough to know when the conversation ended and the next part began. "You're a child who got lucky in East Blue," Aldrich said. "Not cruelly, clinically. The Grand Line is different. The things in these waters are different. You don't know this sea." "No," Luffy agreed easily. "But I'm going to." "Not if you, hey," Luffy said. The word cut across Aldrich's sentence with a gentleness that was more final than shouting. "You came out here because you heard about me. You want to see it, right? The lightning." Aldrich was very still. "Yes," he said. "Okay," Luffy said. "Watch." He didn't think about it the way he thought about rubber. The rubber was external, a mechanical relationship between his body and the world, stretching and snapping back. He pointed a fist and his arm reached 50 feet and hit something and came back. Input, output. Clean. The lightning was internal. It lived in the same place as the feeling that rose in him when something mattered, when something was being threatened that shouldn't be, when the world was trying to press down on something that he'd decided would not be pressed. It wasn't mechanical. It was emotional, which meant it wasn't about technique, not yet. Right now it was about intention. He held out one arm toward the sky. He thought about the people Keel had been hurting. He thought about the bodies Aldrich had left behind him over 6 years of no survivors. He thought about the sea ahead of him, all of it, enormous and full and waiting to be sailed. He thought about his crew on the deck behind him, and the sound of Nami's voice sharp with fear, and how he never wanted to hear that again from her, not because of something he wasn't able to handle. The sky above the Mary darkened. Not gradually. It happened in the space of 2 or 3 seconds, a pulling inward of the clouds, like breathe before a shout, the blue fading to a deep bruised gray-violet that sat directly and specifically over their ship while the sea around them stayed lit in full morning sun. The water under the Mary's hull began to churn and spark, tiny arcs of static jumping between wavelets. "Luffy," Nami said very quietly, from somewhere behind him. The lightning came down. Not one bolt. 3 simultaneously, from 3 different points in the manufactured clouds above them, converging downward, but not on the ship, on him, slamming into Luffy's outstretched arm in a triple crack of light and sound that was so loud and bright that Aldrich's entire crew flinched backward from the railing as one. The thunderclap hit 30 feet of open water, and Nami felt it in her back teeth and her chest and the soles of her feet simultaneously. Luffy stood in it and let it happen. The lightning ran down his arm, across his chest, out to his other arm and his legs, running over the surface of his rubber skin in elaborate branching patterns, the specific fractal shapes of lightning on tree bark, like the world was drawing maps of itself on him. It didn't burn. It didn't penetrate. The rubber held it on the outside, but the electricity was his, so it stayed where he wanted it, wrapping around him in a corona of branching blue-white light, and at the center of it Luffy stood with both arms relaxed at his sides and the clouds raging above him, looking at Aldrich's ship with an expression that wasn't threatening and wasn't performing. He was just looking. The smell hit them a second after the light. Ozone and electricity and something else, something old and clean and enormous. The smell of a storm at sea, but condensed, concentrated, the essence of it, as if someone had taken a whole season of weather and put it in the body of one person. On the iron ring, nobody moved. Aldrich stood at the prow exactly as he had been. He hadn't flinched, and that said something real about him, that he'd stayed on his feet through that. And he looked at Luffy for a long time with an expression that had moved past professional assessment into something more personal. A reckoning. The lightning faded. The clouds dissipated. The morning sun returned, innocent and clear, as though nothing had interrupted it. Luffy lowered his arms. "Still want to talk?" he said. Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, with the specific deliberateness of a man choosing words the way you choose where to place your feet in difficult terrain, "You're not a trick." "No. What do you want from the Grand Line?" "To be king of the pirates." Something moved across Aldrich's face, complex, unreadable, the interior calculus of a man who'd been operating in these waters for 6 years and had built an entire worldview around the mechanics of power, and had just watched those mechanics show him something they didn't have a category for. He was quiet for a long time. His crew stayed at the railing. The two ships rocked in each other's wake. "My crew," Aldrich said finally. "Not a request. Not an offer. Just placing the thing on the table." "Your crew is fine," Luffy said. "I don't care about your crew. I care about the people you're going to come across after today." He looked at Aldrich directly. "Leave them alone." Another silence. "You're not in a position to make conditions." "Sure I am," Luffy said pleasantly. "I just showed you why." The silence after that had a different quality, the particular texture of a conversation where the outcome has actually been determined but the losing party hasn't finished processing it yet, and the winner isn't going to rush them. Eventually, Aldrich turned away from the railing. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His crew read his body and moved, and the iron ring began its turn, and within 10 minutes it was a shape against the horizon moving in the opposite direction, growing smaller, and then it was a point, and then it was gone. Zoro stood next to Luffy and watched it disappear. "You let him go," he said. "Yeah. He's killed a lot of people. He's going to change," Luffy said. "Or he isn't. I can't make him. But I can make it very clear what happens if he comes across us again." Zoro thought about this. "And if he comes across someone else?" Luffy's jaw set, a small motion, subtle, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching carefully. "Then I'll find out about it," he said. "Eventually." It wasn't a perfect answer. They both knew it. But Zoro nodded once, the same nod as before, decision acknowledged, and went back to his weights, and Luffy went back to the figurehead, and the Mary sailed on toward the Thunderstorm Island that was their first real Grand Line destination. The island was called Belu, which the locals would tell you meant something but that no outsider could ever get a consistent translation of. The thunderstorm above it turned out to be permanent, not a normal weather permanent, not the kind you saw in East Blue where a rainy island was just a rainy island, but aggressively, architecturally permanent in the Grand Line way, where the weather was a feature of the landscape the way mountains were features of the landscape. The lightning struck the island's central peak every 47 seconds. Nami had timed it. They made port at the island's small harbor in the afternoon, and the harbor master, a woman in her 60s with the weathered look of someone who had spent 6 decades under constant electrical threat, took one look at Luffy and became extremely still. "You smell like the storm," she said. "Do I?" Luffy said, and sniffed himself, which was such an earnest response that the harbor master blinked. "There's a story," she said, "about a power that belongs to the sky. That went somewhere, drifted, like things do in the Grand Line. Things are always drifting to strange places here." She studied his face. "We've been waiting for the storm to end for 300 years. It's been angry since then." "About what?" Nami asked. The harbor master looked at the peak, where lightning was hitting the rock in its 47-second rhythm, and didn't answer. "They restocked, made repairs to a section of railing that Usopp had damaged during the reverse mountain descent and had been diplomatically pretending wasn't damaged, and by evening they were sitting in Bella's only tavern, a low-ceilinged place full of fishermen and the particular comfortable silence of a town that had been too busy surviving to develop a nightlife, eating the local food, which was excellent, and talking about the day. 42 million. Zoro said, returning to the number the way he returned to problems he hadn't finished solving. Aldrich. That's the kind of bounty that means strong. Strong and experienced, Nami said. 6 years on the Grand Line. He knew what he was doing. He backed down though, Usopp said. He said it with the slightly odd quality of someone who was still cataloging the day's extraordinary events and hadn't finished yet. He's smart, Luffy said. He was on his third bowl of something involving roasted fish and a dark, rich broth, and he spoke with the unhurried confidence of a man who had thought about this as much as he intended to. Strong people who are also smart don't pick fights they're not going to win. You knew he'd back down, Zoro said. It wasn't quite a question. I thought he probably would, Luffy said. He came out to see, not to fight. If he just wanted to fight, he'd have started already. Nami looked at him across the table. She did this sometimes, really looked, the careful specific attention she usually reserved for charts and weather patterns, turned on Luffy with a kind of focused assessment that she never quite voiced aloud. He was, she'd concluded several weeks ago, much more aware of people than he appeared to be. The food obsession and the apparent chaos of his thought process and the way he walked through the world like a very cheerful natural disaster, all of that was real. She was not suggesting it was performance. But underneath it, he read people with an accuracy that had no business belonging to someone who also genuinely couldn't remember which side of the ship was port. The lightning, she said. Today, when you pulled it down from the clouds, you knew that was safe? For us? The rubber keeps it on me, he said. It doesn't jump off to the sides. Or, it didn't today. I don't think it would. He paused, with the honest carefulness of someone who didn't want to overstate their certainty. I think I have to be careful about it going into the ship's hull. I haven't tested that. Please don't test that while we're at sea, she said. On land is fine? On land is fine. He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his bowl. Usopp, who had been watching this exchange, leaned toward Zoro and said, in a very quiet voice, "Is it strange that I find that reassuring?" "Yes," Zoro said. "But you do too." Zoro picked up his sake cup and did not answer, which was its own answer. It was after midnight when Luffy left the tavern and walked up through Bella's narrow streets toward the peak. He didn't tell anyone he was going. It didn't occur to him that he should. It was late, everyone was tired, and this was a thing he needed to do alone, with the straightforward simplicity with which he needed most things. The path up the peak was steep and the lightning was striking every 47 seconds with industrial regularity, and Luffy climbed steadily with his hands in his pockets, not particularly hurrying. The air got more electric as he climbed. He could feel the charge in it, different from the charge inside him, external and ancient and specific to this place, like a conversation happening in a language you don't quite speak but can feel the shape of. He sat down at the peak with his back against the scorched rock that had been taking direct strikes for 3 centuries and stretched his legs out in front of him and waited. The lightning hit. It came down the moment he relaxed into the rock, not the 47-second mark, but immediately, as though it had been waiting for him to get comfortable. It hit the rock 3 feet from where he was sitting and the crack of it was enormous this close, enormous and hot, and the ozone smell was overwhelming. Luffy didn't move. The lightning hit again. Closer. And again. Directly overhead, directly down, straight into the top of Luffy's head. He sat in the strike and let his body do what it did, rubber absorbing the shock, electricity running over the surface of his skin, branching down his arms and legs, spreading out into the rock beneath him where it discharged into the mountain and dissipated. It didn't hurt. It felt like being very loudly agreed with. He sat in the strikes for a long time, feeling the electricity accumulate and discharge, his rubber skin cycling through the current with the easy efficiency of a system that had been designed for exactly this. The feeling in his chest, that second heartbeat, the one that tasted like storm, grew with each strike, filling out, like a room that had always been there but had the wrong furniture in it until now. He wasn't trying to do anything. He was just listening. Around the third hour, when the sky above the peak was doing something that wasn't quite dawn but was the direction of dawn, he noticed that the rhythm had changed. The strikes had been hitting every 47 seconds, mechanical as a clock. Now they were coming at irregular intervals, hesitating, varying, the way a person's heartbeat varies when they're paying attention to something. As though the storm was also listening. "Okay," Luffy said aloud, to no one in particular, or to whatever had been here for 300 years, or to the lightning itself, which was perhaps the same thing as the first two. "I get it now." He stood up. The sky above him rumbled, deep, rolling, without any particular electrical accompaniment, just sound, just the chest feeling of a large thing acknowledging a smaller thing. When Luffy walked back down the path, the storm above the peak broke. Not violently. Not in the way Grand Line storms usually ended, which was with the particular drama of a thing that had been putting on a show and knew how to stick the landing. It simply released. The clouds moved apart the way clouds move when there's no longer any reason to stay, drifting outward and thinning, and over Bella's Peak, for the first time in 300 years, there were stars. He was halfway back down the hill when he heard rapid footsteps behind him and turned to find Nami, who had apparently not been asleep either, coming up the path with her climate act in hand and an expression that was trying to be annoyed and mostly failing. "The storm stopped," she said, pointing at the peak. "Yeah." She looked at the stars visible above the summit. Her mouth did something complicated. "What did you do?" "I don't know exactly," Luffy said. "I went up and listened for a while." "You went up and listened?" "Yeah." Nami looked at the cleared sky for a long moment. The harbor master's words from the afternoon, waiting for the storm to end for 300 years, were clearly moving through her mind. Then she looked at Luffy, this boy in a straw hat who had gone up a lightning-struck mountain alone in the middle of the night and come back with the sky fixed, and she said, with great precision, "You are the strangest person I have ever met." "Thank you," Luffy said. She turned and started back down the hill, and after a moment Luffy fell into step beside her. They walked in silence for a while, comfortable silence, the kind that had developed between them without either of them noticing it happening, the kind that didn't need to be filled. "The lightning is getting stronger," Nami said eventually. Not an accusation, just an observation, the way she made most important observations, cleanly, factually, with the navigator's instinct for noting changes in conditions before they became problems. "Yeah," Luffy said. "Every time you use it, it comes a little more naturally." "Yeah." "Good," she said. She said it simply, without qualification. Then, after a beat, "As long as you don't sink my ship." "Our ship," Luffy said. She glanced at him sideways. "Our ship," she agreed, and there was something in the way she said it, the our, the small accommodation of that word, that said more than the sentence did. They were back at sea the next morning, and the news of Bella's cleared sky had already somehow preceded them, the way news traveled in the Grand Line with the supernatural speed of a world that was always paying attention. At a marine outpost 3 days' sail from Belu, a vice admiral named Riven was reading a report over her morning tea. She was a small, precise woman who had served in the Marines for 23 years and had built a career on the specific talent of identifying threats before they became crises. She had the report now because she had specifically requested reports on this, on the rubber boy from East Blue, the lightning, the stories coming back from the reverse mountain entrance corridor with the flavor of something that started in the impossible category and kept climbing. She read the report twice. Then she set it down and looked out her office window at the Grand Line Sea, which was doing nothing in particular, just being enormous and consequential. Then she picked up a pen and wrote a single line on a clean sheet of paper, sealed it, and handed it to her assistant with instructions for priority delivery. The letter was addressed to Fleet Admiral's office, Marine HQ, and the line read, "The Straw Hat Boy is not what we thought. Someone senior needs to see these reports immediately." She sat back down and drank her tea, which had gone cold, and looked at the sea, and thought about the stories, the lightning column in East Blue, the clouds over a pirate ship in open water, a mountain storm that had stood for 3 centuries dissolving in a single night, and felt in the back of her professional mind, the place where she kept all the things she wasn't ready to say aloud yet. The first cold touch of something that in 23 years she had never felt toward a single pirate. Not anger. Not professional determination. Fear. Clean, clear, unambiguous fear. She finished her cold tea, straightened her papers, and got back to work, because the sea didn't stop being enormous just because something extraordinary was sailing it, and there was always work to be done. 3 days behind the Marine Report, moving at the cheerful, reckless speed of a crew that was still learning what the Grand Line was capable of and had not yet developed the appropriate respect for it, the Going Merry made its course corrections on a bright morning and headed deeper into waters that were already beginning to know its name. On the figurehead, Luffy sat with his feet dangling and his hat on and his eyes open, watching the horizon with the attention of a man listening for something just below the range of ordinary hearing, a frequency specific to this sea, to these waters, the language the Grand Line spoke to the people it had decided to let in. Lightning danced between his fingers, quiet and quick, like something thinking. The horizon burned ahead of them, enormous and full of everything worth sailing toward. Chapter 3. The weight of the sky. The storm came out of nowhere, which Nami said was impossible, and then it came anyway, which was the Grand Line's way of responding to the concept of impossible. She'd been watching the barometric readings for an hour, watching the needle sit in the comfortable middle range where it had no business sitting given what the clouds to the northeast were doing, and then the needle dropped like someone had cut the string holding it up, and she had approximately 40 seconds to start shouting before the weather hit them like a thrown wall. It wasn't a normal storm. Nami knew normal storms the way musicians know scales. She could feel the structure of them, the internal logic, the way pressure and temperature and wind direction combined into something that, however violent, followed rules. This had no rules. The wind came from 3 directions in sequence, not rotating like a proper cyclone but switching, cutting, as though the storm itself was undecided. The waves built in crossed patterns, swells running into each other, and creating sudden vertical peaks that appeared and disappeared. The rain was horizontal and then vertical and then briefly either, suspended in sheets that the wind held in place before tearing apart. "Take the sails down!" Nami was at the helm with both hands and her feet braced, reading the wheel with her whole body. "Zoro, the mizzen first, on it!" Zoro was already moving, already up the mast with the economy of motion of someone who had done this in worse conditions and worse states of sobriety, cutting the sail lines and gathering canvas with an efficiency that would have been impressive even without the ship lurching underneath him. Usopp was at the bow tying things down, his voice completely inaudible above the storm but his movements rapid and practiced, the particular focused competence that appeared in Usopp when genuine danger converted his anxiety from a performance into a resource. Luffy was at the stern. He was standing in the full force of the storm with his feet planted and his arms loose at his sides, and Nami saw him between the driving curtains of rain and felt a spike of complicated alarm, because his expression wasn't the grin he wore in fights or the open wonder he wore for extraordinary things. He was looking up into the storm with a focused, almost troubled attention, the look of someone listening to 2 conversations simultaneously, and finding them increasingly hard to separate. "Luffy!" she shouted. "Get inside!" The lightning hit the mast. It was a proper Grand Line lightning bolt, not the modest East Blue variety. It was a column of light thick as a man's torso that hit the mizzen mast at the top and blew the crow's nest apart in a shower of burning wood. The sound of it was physical, a concussive crack that Nami felt in her ribs. The ship shuddered. The mast held, barely, scorched and smoking in the driving rain. And then the strangest thing happened. Luffy turned toward the strike. He turned toward it the way you turn toward a voice that has just called your name, not startled, not reactive, but attentive, almost answering. He raised one hand toward the remains of the bolt, toward the residual charge still crackling down the mast's scorched length, and the lightning moved. It left the mast and ran along the deck in a single line, like water finding its level, directly into Luffy's outstretched palm, where it disappeared. The mast stopped smoking. Luffy stood with his hands still raised, the absorbed charge playing over his skin in its familiar fractal patterns, and looked up into the storm's center above them. His expression had changed. The troubled focus had resolved into something else, something more certain. "It's not trying to hit us," he said to himself or to the storm or to Nami, and it wasn't clear which. The ship lurched sideways on a freak-crossed wave. The helm spun and Nami threw her weight into it and pulled it back, but the Mary was moving badly, twisting in the conflicting swells, and ahead of them through the rain and dark she could see the shape of something, rocks, a reef, an island, she couldn't tell, but it was close and it was solid and the current was pushing them toward it with enthusiastic indifference to their plans. "Luffy!" she shouted. "The rocks, I see them." He was already at the bow. What happened next took about 4 seconds and used the physical logic that Nami spent the next several days intermittently thinking about. Luffy planted his feet on the figurehead, stretched both arms out in opposite directions until each was 30 feet long, and when a wave came he let it lift the bow and then snapped his arms back and the recoil pulled the entire ship sideways, physically redirecting its course in a movement that no sail and no oar could have managed. The rocks passed 20 feet off the starboard side, close enough to see the barnacles. The storm screamed around them for another 10 minutes and then, with the same absolute absence of logic with which it had arrived, began to ease. The rain thinned. The wind settled to a single direction. The waves went back to their normal hostile Grand Line swells, which felt almost restful by comparison. When it was over, all 4 of them were soaking wet and standing on a deck covered in scattered rope and broken crow's nest pieces, and the only sound was the water running off everything and the normal voice of the sea, and they all looked at each other with the expression people share after surviving something together, part relief, part acknowledgement, part the specific quiet of realizing you're all still here. "Good," Usopp said finally, his voice slightly hollow. "Fine. That was fine." The problem became apparent 20 minutes later when Nami went below for the charts and came back up with an expression that Luffy had learned to read as, "The situation is bad in a specific navigational way that she is not going to soften." "Where are we?" he asked. "That's the question," she said. She spread the chart on the deck, holding the corners down against the remaining wind. "The storm pushed us here." Her finger moved to a position east of their original course. "And the compass is doing what Grand Line compasses do, which is absolutely nothing useful." She tapped the chart. "We're near one of these islands, probably this one given the current, but I need to see the coastline to confirm. And the mast took enough damage that I don't want to push the sails until Usopp has a look at the crosstree." "How separated are we?" Nami looked at him. "From our course?" "A lot." "From the others?" She stopped, and something moved across her face. "Luffy. Where's Zoro?" The deck was quiet. Luffy looked at the stern, at the bow, at the rigging. Usopp appeared from below and said, before anyone could ask, "He's not down there. I thought he was up here." The 4 of them had been 4. They were now 3. Luffy went to the stern railing and looked at the water behind them, the receding storm still dark on the horizon, the churned white wake of the Mary's erratic path, the sea empty in every direction. "He went overboard," Luffy said. "In the storm," Nami said. "When the mast got hit." "He can't swim," Usopp said, with the particular quiet of a person saying a terrible thing simply because it was true. Luffy's hands closed on the railing. "Which island is closest?" "If he went overboard during the rebound from your course correction." Nami was back at the chart, fingers moving quickly. "The current from the storm would have taken him northwest." "Which means," she looked up, "the island to the northwest." "Probably. If he made it to something." "Zoro made it to something," Luffy said. It was not a question. "How do you know?" Usopp asked. "Because it's Zoro," Luffy said, and pushed off the railing to go help Usopp with the mast repairs, which needed doing now so they could move, because Zoro was on an island to the northwest and they needed to go there. The island was called Mira's Shelf, which didn't appear on Nami's charts at all, a fact that she reported in the tone of a person adding one more item to a list of grievances she was maintaining about the Grand Line in general. It was small, mostly jungle, with a crescent of white beach on the south side and a freshwater spring visible from the water. And sitting on the beach, back against a palm tree, 3 swords across his knees, was Zoro, soaking wet, apparently fine, and asleep. "He's asleep," Usopp said from the railing, staring. "He's asleep," Nami confirmed. "He survived being thrown overboard in a Grand Line storm, washed up on an island that doesn't exist on any chart, and he's asleep." "That's Zoro," Luffy said, with great satisfaction. They anchored the Mary in the shallows and Luffy swam, was launched by his own stretched arms in a low arc over the water, because he couldn't swim, onto the beach, landing in a crash of sand near Zoro's tree. Zoro opened one eye. "You're late," he said. "You were asleep," Luffy said. "I was waiting." He sat up, stretching, cracking his neck in a way that produced sounds like small gunshots. "Currents here are weird. I figured you'd find the island before I could find you." He looked at Luffy. "Mass damage? Crow's nest is gone. Cross tree needs work. Nami says a day, maybe 2. Zoro nodded and stood, and that was the entirety of the reunion. No drama, no commentary on the fact that he'd spent an unknown number of hours on an uncharted island with devil fruit inability to swim and had apparently responded by napping. He picked up his swords and walked toward the water to wade back to the Mary, and that was Zoro completely and entirely. Luffy stayed on the beach for a moment, looking at the island's tree line. The jungle here was extraordinary, thick and old-looking in the specific way of Grand Line vegetation, the kind of green so saturated it looked painted. Something in the air had that electric quality he'd felt on Bella's Peak, a charge in the atmosphere, though there were no clouds. He'd been feeling it since the storm. That pulling sensation, that frequency below the normal frequency of things. On the Mary during the worst of the weather, when the Grand Line bolt had struck the mast and he'd reached for it, he'd understood something in that moment, some grammar of the thing in him, a sentence structure he hadn't known before. The lightning that lived in him wasn't separate from weather. It was continuous with it. The clouds above Bella hadn't been responding to him so much as recognizing him, the way a tide recognizes the moon, not because the moon commands it, but because they're part of the same system. He sat down on the beach and thought about that. The Mary's repairs took a day and a half. Mira's Shelf turned out to have a small community in the island's interior, 30 or 40 people, fisherfolk and farmers who'd been here long enough to develop the particular self-contained quality of communities that don't see outsiders often and have stopped requiring them. They traded fresh fruit and timber for some of Usopp's rope stock, which they'd apparently been needing for months, and the exchange happened with the relaxed ease of people who hadn't yet heard about lightning-wielding pirates, and were therefore relating to the Straw Hats as just people, which was refreshing. On the afternoon of the first day, Nami found Luffy on the beach doing something she couldn't immediately classify. He was sitting in the sand about 30 feet from the waterline with his eyes closed and both palms flat on the ground beside him, and the air immediately around him was doing the subtle crackle that meant the lightning was active. But he wasn't doing anything with it, no bolts, no corona, no visible discharge. Just sitting with it, the way you sit with a cup of tea you're letting cool. She sat down next to him, not close enough to be in whatever radius she'd designated as the cautious zone, and watched the water for a while. "What are you doing?" she asked eventually. "Learning it," he said, without opening his eyes. "What does that mean?" He was quiet for a moment. "It's like..." He paused, working toward the words with the particular effort of someone who didn't usually need words for things he understood in his body. "When I figured out the rubber. I already had it, right? I'd had it for years. But at first I could only do the simple things, punch far, stretch my neck, bounce things off my body. It took time before I understood what it actually was. What it could do. And the lightning is the same. It's different. The rubber is. He searched. It's mechanical. I understand mechanical. The lightning is. Another pause. It's more like a feeling that has a physical form. Every time I use it, I understand the feeling better. So I understand the form better. Nami looked at his hands still flat in the sand, the tiny arcs of static playing between his fingers and the grains. What does it feel like right now? Like something sleeping, he said. Like there's a lot more of it than I've been using and the rest of it is just. He glanced at her sideways with one eye open, waiting. She absorbed this. Then, is it going to be like that thing on Belu? Where you accidentally cleared a 300-year storm? I don't think I accidentally cleared it, he said. I think it needed to end and I was the thing it needed. Nami looked at him. The afternoon light was doing something specific to the sea, turning it from blue to a rich amber gold, and it hit Luffy's face at an angle that showed the scar under his eye clearly. He was watching the water now, both eyes open, and he looked, she searched for the right word, not more serious than usual, because Luffy in his own way was always serious, but grounded. Like someone who'd found the bottom of something and planted their feet. The Marines are going to come for you, she said. Not just captains. The word is spreading too fast. She'd been thinking this since Belu, since the harbor master's face, since the way Aldrich had looked at Luffy from his prow like a man recalibrating the entire architecture of his assumptions. What happened on Belu is the kind of thing that gets reported. I know, Luffy said. It doesn't bother you. Why would it? Because the Marines have admirals, she said. Men with devil fruits. Men who've been doing this for 30 years. Good, Luffy said. And the word was not bravado. It wasn't the puffed chest posturing of someone trying to seem fearless. It was just direct, the statement of someone for whom the escalating scale of a challenge was a feature rather than a problem. The stronger they are, the more it means when they can't stop us. Nami looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the sea. A long silence passed between them, the comfortable kind, filled by the sound of the water and the distant noise of Usopp doing something structural to the crosstree that involved the hammer. Luffy, she said. Yeah. When you're king of the pirates, what does that actually look like? For you. He thought about it. She watched him think about it, which was its own kind of interesting. Luffy's thinking was visible on his face in a way that most people's wasn't, the processing happening out in the open, no performance of consideration. Just actual consideration. The same as now, he said finally. But we've sailed everywhere. And everyone I care about can do whatever they want. Nami can map the whole world. Zoro is the best swordsman. Usopp is, whatever Usopp wants to be. He glanced at her. And you don't have to worry about anything anymore. She opened her mouth and found that she had nothing ready to say to that. It had been said so plainly, not romantically, not with any specific weight intended, just placed down as a fact of what Luffy was building toward, with Nami inside it as something that didn't need to be explained or justified. She looked away before he could see whatever was on her face, back at the amber sea, and said, We're going to need a bigger ship eventually. Yeah, he agreed. And a cook. Definitely a cook. She smiled. It was a real one, not the navigator's professional half-smile or the one she used on people she was planning to swindle, but a full, unself-conscious smile, aimed at the water, belonging to nobody and therefore belonging to the moment. Okay, she said. Let's get through the first half of the Grand Line first. Easy, Luffy said. Nothing about the Grand Line is easy. Okay, he said agreeably. But it'll be fine. And the maddening thing, she thought, was that she believed him. That evening, while Nami and Usopp were finalizing the repair work and Zoro was doing something meditative with a single sword on the beach, Luffy walked inland. The jungle on Mira's shelf had that old, listening quality he noticed from the beach. The trees were enormous, the kind with buttress roots that spread outward like the feet of something that had been standing for a very long time and intended to keep standing. The air between them was cool and still, and the electric quality he'd felt all day was stronger here, directional, like a compass finding its heading. He walked until he found the spring, a small circular pool fed from a crack in a mossy rock, the water incredibly clear, cold to the touch. He sat beside it and let the jungle be quiet around him. He held out one hand and built the lightning slowly, deliberately, the way he'd been practicing on the beach. Letting it accumulate rather than summoning it all at once, feeling the charge build in his chest first, then down his arm, gathering in his palm like water collecting in a low place. It took longer this way. It took patience, which was not always Luffy's strongest trait, but he was learning that the lightning responded to patience differently than it responded to urgency. With urgency, it came out as an event, sudden, explosive, the full force of it all at once. With patience, it came out as a conversation. The ball of it in his palm was the size of an orange, spinning slowly, a miniature storm. He could feel its internal structure, the positive and negative charges cycling through each other, the organizing principle that kept it coherent rather than dispersing. He turned it over, watching it, and tried the thing he'd been working toward all afternoon. He changed its shape. Not by touching it, by intending it, by having a clear picture of what he wanted and holding that picture steady while the feeling in his chest adjusted to match. The ball elongated, stretched, became a thin line of light that curved in the air above his palm like a question mark, crackling faintly, patient. He was so focused on it that he didn't hear the child approach until a twig snapped 6 feet away. He looked up. A girl, maybe 8 years old, was standing at the edge of the spring's small clearing, staring at the light in his hand with huge eyes. She was clearly one of the island children, barefoot, a woven bracelet on her wrist, the deeply tanned look of a kid who spent all of her time outside. He looked at the lightning in his hand. She looked at the lightning in his hand. He thought about dismissing it, but she'd already seen it, and lying about things he'd been seen doing was not something he'd ever really understood. "Cool, right?" he said. She inched forward about 6 inches. "Does it hurt?" "No." Another inch. "Can I see it close?" He held his hand out, the question mark of light still curving above his palm. She came forward and crouched in front of it, her face lit from below by the blue-white glow, and looked at it with the total unguarded wonder of a child who hasn't yet developed the adult reflex of pretending not to be amazed by things. "It's alive," she said. "Sort of," he said. "It does what I tell it, mostly." "Mostly?" "When I'm very angry it does what it wants," he said honestly. She considered this. "My dad says lightning comes from the sky." "Usually it does," he agreed. "Where does yours come from?" He thought about Shanks, and the gum-gum fruit, and the barrel he'd been trapped in, and the sea he'd been pulled out of, and the long East Blue years of training his rubber body against trees and cliffs. He thought about the thing inside him that had always been there, the pressure before the storm, the charge in the air before the rain. "From me," he said. "I think it always did. It just took a while to come out." She nodded, satisfied with this, and watched the lightning curve and shift in his palm. After a few minutes she said, without looking up, "My grandma says a storm god blessed our island a long time ago. She says the lightning never hurts anyone here because the god made a deal. The storm could stay as long as it didn't hurt the people." "What was the deal?" "She doesn't know that part." The girl looked up at him. "Do you think it's true?" Luffy thought about sitting at the peak of Bella while the 300-year storm struck him again and again, and the way the rhythm of the bolts had changed, hesitating, varying, like breath. The way it had felt like being very loudly agreed with. The way the sky had released when he came down the mountain, clouds drifting apart with the ease of something that had finally been permitted to stop. "Yeah," he said. "I think it's probably true." The girl sat beside him by the spring until it was almost dark, and Luffy let the lightning play in small shapes above his palm, birds, roughly, and something like a fish, and once something that was supposed to be a ship and she said looked more like a boot, which was fair. When she went home to her family she went at a run, the woven bracelet catching the last of the light, and she stopped at the tree line and turned back. "Are you going to stay?" she asked. "No," he said. "We're leaving tomorrow." She looked at him. Will the storm come back? Luffy looked at the sky above them, clear now, full of stars, the same stars he'd seen uncovered for the first time above Bella's Peak when the lightning had recognized him and let the clouds go. No, he said. I don't think it will. She nodded once, satisfied, and disappeared into the trees, and Luffy sat by the spring alone in the dark with the lightning in his hand, turning it over, learning the shape of it. The next morning, when Nami pronounced a merry seaworthy, they broke camp quickly and the crew moved with the specific efficiency that came from a group of people who'd been separated by bad weather and were done being separated. Supplies were loaded, the repairs were checked, and the anchor came up. Luffy stood on the figurehead and felt the island behind him as they pulled away, Mirror Shelf, with its old trees and clear spring and a little girl who had wanted to know if lightning was alive. The electric quality in the island's air followed them for a while, getting fainter as the distance grew, and then it was just the sea, the normal electric aliveness of Grand Line water. Where are we heading? Usopp asked Nami. She had the chart spread on the deck, her finger on the route she'd recalculated during the repair days. Alabasta region eventually, but there's a settlement on the way, a larger island, that we need to stop at for supplies. She paused. There's also been activity around it. Marine ships, according to what the Mirror Shelf people told me. How many? Zoro asked. A few. It's a resupply point, both for us and apparently for whoever's operating in this section of the Grand Line. She looked up. And another pause, the kind that contained information she was deciding how to present. The people here said there's been a warlord operating in this region. Someone using the marine activity as cover to consolidate tribute from the smaller islands. The word warlord sat in the air for a moment with the specific weight it carried. The 7 sanctioned pirates, the intersection between the world's criminal element and the world's official power structures. People who existed in that particular complicated space where the lines between authority and piracy blurred until the distinction was academic. Who? Luffy asked. Nami looked at her notes. They call him Ironback. Real name Corsair. He was a marine officer until about 15 years ago, left, went pirate, got good enough at it that the world government decided it was easier to hand him a warlord's flag than to deal with him. He's smart and he's careful and he has a Logia-type devil fruit, specifically. She hesitated. Specifically what? Zoro said. A metal generation type, she said. He creates and controls iron. He can coat himself in it, project it, manipulate it remotely. She looked at Luffy. He's effectively immune to blunt force. And given what the Marines apparently told him, he knows I'm coming, Luffy said. He knows you're in this section of the Grand Line, she corrected. And he knows about your bounty, which hasn't been officially set yet, but the Marines apparently sent word that you're to be taken alive. She set down the chart. Which means he has an incentive. Luffy nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at the horizon, at the direction the chart said the settlement island was. The lightning in his chest was doing nothing remarkable, just its normal patient warmth, the second heartbeat, quiet and present. Logia, Zoro said, from where he was leaning on the mast. You've never fought a Logia. No, Luffy agreed. Blunt force passes through them. Physical attacks need to be coded in Haki or... He paused, looking at Luffy's hands. Or what? Usopp said. Zoro and Luffy looked at each other. Something passed between them, the specific nonverbal communication of two people who'd been in enough fights together to have developed a shared tactical language. Or lightning, Luffy said. Zoro almost smiled. He had a very restrained smile, the kind that only reached his eyes and only briefly, like sunlight on a moving surface. Logia users maintain their solid form through concentration, he said. Enough force, the right kind of force, disrupts that concentration. How much is enough? Usopp asked, with the academic interest of a man who was absolutely not going to be the one delivering said force but liked to have the full picture. Luffy held up one hand and the lightning gathered in his palm, spinning up quickly, the orange-sized ball from yesterday but brighter, more organized, the internal structure tighter. He looked at it, then at the horizon, then at his crew. "Let's find out," he said. There was a collective pause. Then Usopp said, with enormous sincerity, "I love our crew," and went to help Nami with the sails. The Mary caught the wind and moved forward with the particular eagerness of a ship that had been sitting still and was glad to be moving again, and behind them Mara's shelf shrank and disappeared, and ahead the Grand Line opened its arms as it always did, generously, violently, with complete indifference to what you thought you were ready for. The sky above them was clean and wide and full of the specific kind of light that meant something was building, not a storm, not yet, but the charged pre-feeling of one, the atmospheric signature of a world paying attention. On the figurehead, the lightning in Luffy's hands turned over and over like a thought finding its form. The settlement island was 2 days ahead. Corsair was waiting. Chapter 4. Iron and Thunder. The settlement island of Resh sat in a natural harbor shaped like a cupped hand, the kind of geography that made it easy to defend and easier to control. 3 hills ringed the town from the landward side, and between them and the harbor there were maybe 4,000 people living the specific kind of life that happened when someone powerful had decided that their continued living was conditional on regular payment. The Straw Hats saw the tribute boats before they saw the town. Small fishing vessels, loaded down and moving slow, converging on the harbor from the surrounding smaller islands, each one flying a white strip of cloth from the mast, the universal signal that said, "We are not a threat, we are bringing what you asked for. Please don't do what you did last time." Nami counted 7 of them from a distance, and her jaw went tight in the specific way it did when she was experiencing something she recognized from the inside. "He runs the whole cluster," she said. "Not just Vresh. All the smaller islands too." Luffy watched the tribute boats from the figurehead. He didn't say anything. "The marine ships are in the harbor," Zoro said, from the crow's nest. The crow's nest was still technically absent its structure, but Zoro had taken to simply standing at the top of the mast in its place, which he appeared to find adequate. 3 frigates. Naval colors. They're docked, not patrolling. He has a working arrangement with them," Nami said. "The warlord system in practice. He keeps independent pirates from disrupting marine operations in the region, and in exchange they let him do whatever he wants to the local population." "That's the deal?" Usopp said. "That's the deal." Usopp was quiet for a moment. "That's a terrible deal for the locals." "Yes," Nami said. "That is famously the problem with that deal." Luffy was still watching the tribute boats. One of them was very small, barely 20 feet, overloaded with crates that sat above the railing line, piloted by an old man and a teenage boy who were working the sail together with the exhausted synchrony of people who had been doing hard things for too long. The white strip of cloth from their masts snapped in the harbor wind. "Take us in," Luffy said. "Into the harbor?" Nami said. "Luffy, there are 3 marine frigates, take us in," he said again, in the same tone, which wasn't louder or more intense than the first time but had the quality of a thing that had already been decided and was only waiting on the logistics. Nami looked at the harbor. She looked at Luffy. She made the calculation she always made, the one where she weighed the odds against the particular certainty that lived in the line of his shoulders when he'd made up his mind about something, and she turned the wheel. "Fine," she said. "But if we sink my ship I will personally, our ship," Luffy said. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. The harbor of Vresh was designed for control, one entrance channel, narrow enough that ships passed through single file, with the hills on either side offering excellent positions for anyone who wanted to make entry difficult. As the Mary moved through the channel, Luffy could see men on the hills, sentries in roughneck gear that was neither marine issue nor the standardized equipment of any particular pirate crew, just the practical armed look of people who worked for someone practical. They watched the Mary come through. Nobody stopped it. This was the first interesting thing. The second interesting thing was waiting on the main dock, a man sitting on a bollard with his arms crossed and the relaxed posture of someone who had known company was coming and had decided the correct response was to make yourself comfortable and wait. He was compact, mid-40s, with the kind of face that had once been handsome and had subsequently taken a professional interest in becoming unreadable. He wore no weapons. He wore no armor. He wore a plain dark coat and good boots, and he watched the merry dock with the expression of a man watching something he had already thoroughly thought about. This was Corsair. Luffy knew it before anyone said anything, the way you sometimes know a thing from how a person takes up space, from the specific quality of their stillness. He jumped from the figurehead to the dock before the Mary had fully stopped and walked toward Corsair with his hands in his pockets, and Corsair watched him come with the same measured attention. They stopped 6 feet from each other. "Monkey D, Luffy," Corsair said. Not greeting, not threat, notation. "You're younger than the reports suggested." "You're Corsair," Luffy said. "Yes." He uncrossed his arms, not in a threatening way, just shifting his weight. "I've been in these waters a long time. I've seen a lot of things come through the Grand Line. Boys who were going to be Pirate King. Men who were sure they had what it took." He studied Luffy's face with the unsettling focus of someone reading fine print. "Most of them didn't make it to the second island. I'm on my third," Luffy said. Something moved in Corsair's expression, not quite amusement, something with the shape of amusement but made of different material. "The Marines want you alive," he said. "You already know that." "Yeah. They've authorized significant resources. My cooperation, specifically." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to be straightforward with you. It's easier. I have 40 men in this harbor, 3 marine frigates at my disposal under the current arrangement, and a devil fruit ability that your rubber body will not help you with." "Iron," Luffy said. "Iron," Corsair confirmed. "I make it, shape it, become it. Your punches won't touch me, your kicks won't touch me, and..." A brief pause. "Whatever else you have, I'm interested to see how it interacts with several tons of shaped metal." Behind Luffy, he heard Zoro drop from the ship to the dock, quiet and deliberate. He heard Nami and Usopp staying on the deck, which was smart. Nami because she was reading the situation, Usopp because he had good instincts about when his particular skill set was and wasn't the first tool for a problem. "Why are you telling me all this?" Luffy said. Corsair looked at him. "Because I was a Marine for 12 years, he said. "Before this. And in 12 years I learned that the way to prevent a battle you're not certain of winning is to give the other party a clear picture of the situation before it starts. A beat. Come with me peacefully. No one gets hurt. The Marines take you in, you go through the system, maybe you get out, maybe you don't, but the people in this harbor stay safe. The people in this harbor are paying you tribute," Luffy said. "They're not safe. You're the thing they're not safe from." Corsair was quiet. His expression didn't change, exactly, but something behind it did, a small internal movement, like a building settling, the particular shift that happens when someone who has rationalized something for a long time hears it stated plainly. "The tribute keeps the worse options away," he said. "The tribute," Luffy said, "is the worse option." A silence. The harbor was quiet around them, the sentries on the hills watching, the marine frigates still and dark at their moorings, the tribute boats from the surrounding islands sitting in the water with their white strips of cloth. Then Corsair stood up from the bollard. "Show me the lightning," he said. He wasn't testing Luffy's power. Luffy understood this immediately. It wasn't a taunt, it was a professional request. Corsair was a man who made real decisions, and he was asking for real information before he made this one. Luffy held up one hand and let it come. Not a demonstration version, not the restrained ball he'd been practicing with on Mira's shelf, the real thing, the full unguarded feeling of it. He thought about the tribute boats, and the white cloth and the old man and the boy working the sail, and the lightning came down from the clear sky above the harbor in a single clean column that struck his arm and ran over his body in its fractal patterns, and the crack of it echoed off the 3 surrounding hills like a struck bell. The harbor flinched. The sentries on the hills stepped back. On the marine frigates, he could hear shouted orders. Corsair did not step back. He looked at the lightning on Luffy's skin with the focused expression of a professional encountering a new variable, and determining its properties. Then he looked at Luffy's face. "That's conducted through you," he said. "Not deflected. You absorb it." "Yeah. Rubber should insulate, not conduct." "I know," Luffy said. Corsair thought about this for approximately 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, something changed in his posture, a very small change, the kind you'd miss if you weren't watching carefully. His certainty, which had been the absolute baseline certainty of a man who had operated at the top of his field for 6 years and knew exactly what the parameters were, had acquired a hairline crack. "That's not just a devil fruit interaction," he said. "No," Luffy agreed. Corsair looked at him for a long moment. "What are you?" "I told you already. You told me you're going to be king of the pirates." "Right," Luffy said. Another silence. Corsair turned and looked at the harbor, at the tribute boats, at his men on the hills, at the marine frigates. His hands were at his sides, relaxed, the hands of a man who was thinking rather than acting, and Luffy waited, because this was the kind of moment that had its own pace and rushing it would be wrong. "It won't be clean," Corsair said finally. "If we fight here. There are a lot of people in this harbor." "I know," Luffy said. "We don't have to do it here." Corsair looked at him sharply. "You're giving me the choice of location." "Sure," Luffy said. The lightning had faded from his skin, but he could feel it still, warm and present, the second heartbeat. "You want to do it on the hill? Away from the harbor?" A very long pause. "You're not afraid?" Corsair said. It came out as something between an observation and a question. "Of you?" Luffy said. "No." "Of losing?" "No." "Why not?" Luffy thought about it, genuinely, because the answer deserved a genuine answer. "Because I've never been in a fight I thought I was going to lose," he said. "Not because I'm always the strongest in the room. Because I don't think about it that way. I think about what I'm fighting for and whether that thing is real enough. And then I fight." Corsair looked at him for a very long time. Then he turned and looked at his men on the hills, and he made a gesture, a small, specific hand signal, and the men on the hills changed their posture in response, weapons shifting to a neutral carry position. "The eastern hill," he said. "Open ground. Away from the harbor." "Okay," Luffy said. He turned and looked at Zoro, who was standing 4 feet behind him with the comfortable stillness of a man who had been ready for several minutes and was content to wait. "I'll watch the harbor," Zoro said. "The frigates won't be a problem," Zoro said. The tone of this was very calm and very specific, and the marine officers on the frigates, one of whom was watching through a spyglass from the top deck, probably had strong feelings about it. Luffy nodded. He looked back at Corsair, who was already walking toward the eastern hill, and followed. The eastern hill was everything Corsair had said: open ground, the harbor and the town visible below them, empty of people, the grass short and salt-burnt by the sea wind. They stood 50 feet apart, and the morning light hit them at the same angle, the same flat, bright, grand line light that didn't care who it illuminated. Corsair removed his coat. Underneath it his body was already changing, the iron coming up through his skin the way a Logia ability manifested, the physical form shifting to accommodate the new material. His skin went gray, then darker, the texture of it changing to the specific matte surface of raw iron, and his silhouette hardened and became angular at the edges where the transformation wasn't quite complete. He moved an arm and the sound was the sound of something mechanical, deep and resonant, metal on metal. "You understand what this means?" he said. His voice had changed too, not dramatically, still his voice, but with a subsonic undertone now, a resonance that the iron produced. "Blunt force, cutting force, kinetic impact, none of it will matter. I am the iron. You can't hurt iron with your hands." "I don't plan to use my hands," Luffy said. Corsair moved first, which was smart. He'd assessed that letting Luffy set the terms of engagement was tactically wrong, and he was right about that, and he moved with the speed that a Logia body allowed, which was faster than an Iron Man had any right to be because the iron wasn't muscle but intent. He crossed 30 feet in 2 steps and his arm came around in a swing that had the mass and velocity of a wrecking ball, and the accuracy of someone who had been practicing this for 6 years. Luffy stretched backward, rubber body folding away from the swing, the iron fist passing through the space his head had just occupied, and let the stretch carry him sideways and up, landing on Corsair's other side with the quick, light placement of someone who thought about footwork the way other people thought about breathing. Gomu Gomu! He launched himself backward, arms stretching 50 feet, locked onto the hill's single rocky outcrop, and the recoil brought him back at speed. He hit Corsair in the center of the chest with both feet together, and the impact was the impact of a rubber man using a cliff as a slingshot, which was considerable, and also it did exactly nothing. His feet bounced off the iron chest. Corsair didn't move. "I told you," Corsair said. "I know," Luffy said, flipping back to his feet. "I needed to feel it." Corsair's arm transformed, not swinging now but projecting, the iron extending outward in a spike that shot toward Luffy's midsection at speed. Rubber bent around it, the spike passing through him the wrong way, not penetrating, but not useful for Luffy either, the iron too rigid and too real for rubber to do anything to it. The spike withdrew. Another came, from a different angle, then a third, faster, and Luffy moved between them with the pure athletic instinct of a body that was very good at not being where things were. But Corsair was smart. He wasn't trying to hit Luffy with any particular spike. He was mapping movement, filling space, constructing a geometry of iron that reduced the available ground. 2 more projections from the arms, one from the left shoulder, and Luffy's lateral movement was suddenly limited, the iron walls of the constructed geometry close enough to graze his vest. "Stand still," Corsair said, and brought both arms together. The iron compressed inward, a cage, fast and 3-dimensional, and Luffy had about half a second before it closed, and he made a decision. He dropped flat to the ground, below the closing ceiling of the cage, and felt the iron snap shut above him, enclosing a volume of air that did not contain him. From the ground, with his back flat in the salt-burned grass and the iron cage 6 inches above his nose, Luffy looked up at the dull gray ceiling and grinned. He put both palms flat on the ground. He had been practicing patience. The slow accumulation rather than the explosive demand. The conversation rather than the shout. And now, with the iron cage above him and Corsair standing over it with both arms extended maintaining the structure, Luffy reached for the lightning the way he'd learned to reach for it, not with urgency but with intention, with the clear specific image of what he needed, with the feeling behind it, which was not quite anger and not quite joy but the particular convergence of the two that happened when Luffy was in a fight that mattered. The charge built in his chest. Down through his arms. Into his palms and into the ground. The grass around him began to crackle. He thought about the old man and the boy on the tribute boat. He thought about the white cloth snapping in the harbor wind. The lightning didn't come from the sky this time. It came from him, from the ground up, running outward through the salt-burnt grass and branching lines like roots, reaching the iron cage and finding in it exactly what lightning always finds in iron, a path. The cage lit up. Every bar of it, every surface, conducting the charge in an instant, carrying it up and into Corsair's arms and through his iron body in a full-system shock that had no precedent in Corsair's 6 years of combat experience because nobody he had ever fought could generate lightning and nobody he had ever fought had the rubber body necessary to generate it safely from inside an iron cage. The cage exploded outward. Not from the force of the explosion, from Corsair's involuntary loss of concentration, his Logia form breaking for the half-second that the current disrupted his focus, the iron losing its coherence, and springing back to inert metal that clattered across the hilltop in heavy chunks. Corsair stumbled. His iron skin flickered, present, absent, present, the form trying to re-establish itself while his nervous system was still processing the shock. Luffy was on his feet. He stretched his right arm back further than he usually needed to, not for distance, for charge, letting the accumulated lightning in his arm build with the stretch the way a bow builds tension, the rubber acting as the bow, the electricity as the arrow. He let the stretch hold for 2 full seconds, feeling the charge reach its peak, the level past the orange-sized ball, past the column from the sky, into the volume he'd felt on Mira's shelf sitting by the spring, the amount that was waiting, that had always been waiting. Goma no! Corsair's iron skin came back up. Full coverage, complete transformation, the grey dark surface solid and continuous, and he braced himself with both feet and both arms because he understood now what was coming and was applying every bit of his 6 years of Logia experience to making himself as structurally sound as possible. Thunder Pistol. The name came out of nowhere. He hadn't planned it, it just arrived, the way the right word sometimes does, and his fist hit Corsair in the dead center of the chest with the full snapped rubber force and the full build charge simultaneously, and the lightning didn't run over Corsair's iron skin this time. It went through it. Iron conducts. That was the entire problem with being an Iron Man hit by lightning. The rubber didn't conduct, so the charge stayed in Luffy's fist and transferred wholly into the iron on impact, following every path available to it, which in a human-shaped iron structure was every nerve and every muscle and every deep interior system. The iron form broke completely. Corsair went off the hill. He went a long way. He came down in the grass 40 feet away and didn't get up immediately, and when he did get up it was slowly, his hands out to the sides for balance, his iron form entirely gone, just a man in the grass with gray-streaked hair and the specific expression of someone who has just had their entire professional self-assessment revised against their will. Luffy walked over. He stopped a few feet away and looked at Corsair, who was on one knee, and the lightning in his hand was still there, not threatening but present, the way a fire is present when you've just used it, and the coals are still bright. Corsair looked at his hands. Then he looked up at Luffy. "That's not a paramecia," he said. "No," Luffy said. "The lightning isn't the fruit. The fruit's the rubber. The lightning is—" he paused. "Mine." A silence. Somewhere below them, in the harbor, there was shouting, not combat, he could tell from the pitch, but the shouting of people making rapid reassessments, and he trusted Zoro to be handling whatever that was. "You won," Corsair said. Flat, direct, the statement of a man who didn't spend energy on denial. "Yeah," Luffy said. "What do you want?" Luffy looked down at him. "The tribute stops," he said. "Today. The smaller islands stop paying. Your arrangement with the Marines ends." Corsair was quiet. "If my arrangement with the Marines ends, they'll send someone to deal with me." "Probably," Luffy said. "That doesn't concern you. You're smart, and you're capable, and you used to be a Marine," Luffy said. "Figure it out." A pause. "Or find something better to do. Either way, it's not these people's problem anymore." Corsair looked at the harbor below, the tribute boats, the frigates, the town. He looked at it for a long time with the expression of a man doing an accounting, tallying up the costs and credits of a position he'd held for long enough that he'd stopped seeing it clearly. Luffy waited, because this was another moment with its own pace. "The Marines will move against me directly," Corsair said, "when I stop providing my end of the arrangement." "Yeah," Luffy said. "You know that's on you." "Yeah," Luffy said again, without any particular guilt, because this was the specific kind of consequence that came from doing the right thing and he had no objection to consequences. "Tell them it was me. That I made you stop. They already know my name." Something moved across Corsair's face, the expression of a man who had received something unexpected and was still deciding what it was. Not quite respect, not yet, but the raw material of it. He got to his feet, carefully, and straightened his clothes with the automatic dignity of a man who'd spent 12 years in a Marine uniform and never fully lost the muscle memory of it. "You're going to make it very complicated," he said. "Being what you are. In these waters." "I know," Luffy said. "The ones who come after me will be worse." "I know that too." Corsair looked at him one last time, really looked, the full assessment, everything on the table. Then he turned and walked back toward the harbor without another word, and Luffy watched him go and felt the lightning in his hands settle back to its resting warmth, the second heartbeat, quiet as always. Zoro had, in fact, handled it. The precise details of what had happened between Zoro and the marine frigates while Luffy was on the hill were somewhat unclear and would remain so, partly because Zoro gave a one-sentence account and then considered the subject closed, and partly because the marine officers involved were not particularly eager to discuss it. The outcome was that all 3 frigates had departed the harbor with significant urgency, and the specific body language of ships that have somewhere very important to be that is not here. "Did you fight them?" Usopp asked. "No," Zoro said. "Did you threaten them?" "I stood near the dock," Zoro said. Nami looked at him. "You stood near the dock and they left." "They made some assessments," Zoro said. "And then they left." Nami looked at the empty mooring points where 3 frigates had been an hour ago and decided this was a satisfactory outcome and moved on. The town of Resh came out slowly, the way people come out when they've learned over a long time that good things tend to have catches. They came out first in 1s and 2s, a door opening here, a figure in an alley there, and then more steadily as the ones who'd come out first were demonstrably fine. By evening there were 100 people on the harbor front, and the tribute boats from the surrounding islands were being unloaded, their cargo going back rather than being delivered. An older man came and found Luffy sitting on a dock post eating something he traded for in the market, a spiced grain cake, incredibly good, and said, with the careful precision of a man who'd been thinking about what he wanted to say and had arrived at the simplest version of it, "Thank you?" Luffy nodded. "How long does it last?" the man said. "People like him, they come back. Or someone else comes." Luffy thought about this honestly, because the man deserved honesty. "I don't know," he said. "I can't promise it stays fixed. I can only fix it while I'm here." He looked at the man. "But it's fixed right now. And now you know it can be fixed. That means something." The man was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. The same kind of nod, the slow, deliberate one that meant a thing had been received and stored. "You're the lightning boy," he said. "I'm Luffy," Luffy said. "Luffy," the man repeated, like he was deciding something about the sound of it. "You should eat more. You're very thin for someone who just threw a warlord off a hill." Luffy immediately held out his grain cake. "Can I get more of these?" They stayed in Vresh for 1 night. Nami wanted to move earlier. The marine frigate departure was going to generate reports, and the reports were going to generate responses, and she wanted water between them and any response before it arrived. But she also understood, without anyone saying it, that the crew needed to breathe. Zoro slept on the dock, which was just where Zoro slept when he could. Usopp found a family who had young children and spent 3 hours doing a magic show in their courtyard that produced sounds of absolute delight that carried through the evening air. Nami sat on the Mary's deck after dark with her charts and a lamp, recalculating their route, and looked up periodically at Luffy, who was on the figurehead as always, his hat on and his legs dangling, looking at the harbor's quiet water. "Vice Admiral Riven sent a report," she said. She'd heard this from a dock worker who'd heard it from a marine messenger who'd been in the harbor before the frigates left. "To Fleet Admiral's office." "Yeah," Luffy said. "That means it's going to admirals." "Actual admirals?" "Yeah." She waited for him to say something more. He didn't. "You're not going to run," she said. "Not a question." "Where would I run to?" he said. "The Grand Line is the Grand Line. Everyone who matters is on it." He adjusted his hat. "If admirals want to come, they can come. We'll deal with it." Nami looked at the water. In the harbor, a lamp on one of the tribute boats swayed with the swell, a small regular light, patient. "The thing on the hill today," she said. "You did something new. The lightning through the ground." "Yeah. You figured that out in the fight." "I figured out part of it on Mira Shelf," he said. "With the spring. The lightning went into the water a few times and I noticed how it moved through it." He held up a hand, the crackling faint and familiar. "It follows paths. It wants to follow paths. I just have to understand which paths are available." Nami looked at his hand for a long time. Then she looked at her charts. Then she looked at her charts in a different way, not the navigator's reading, the cartographer's reading, the way she looked at the shape of things. "You're going to be something the Grand Line has never seen," she said. "I think you said that before," he said. "I say it every time there's new evidence," she said. He laughed. She turned back to her charts, and the harbor lamp swayed in its small regular rhythm, and the Mary sat in the water of a harbor that was breathing easier than it had in years. In Marine HQ, on the same night, a report reached a desk that had not yet been asked to look at it. The report was flagged priority, and its language was precise, and the man who read it, a large man with silver hair and a white coat that bore the insignia of an admiral, read it once without expression, and then read it again, and then set it down and looked out the window at the sea. His name was Cressfall. He had the eyes of a man who had made decisions that cost him things he hadn't been able to afford, and had made them anyway, and had been carrying the weight of them for long enough that it no longer registered as weight, just as the way standing felt. He read the report a third time. A rubber boy who commanded lightning. Who had dismantled a warlord's operation on his third Grand Line island. Who had let the warlord go. That last detail was the one that stayed with him, the one he kept returning to as he set the report down, and stood and walked to the window. Not the power. He'd seen extraordinary power before, had dealt with it, had his own methods. The power was a variable. He could work with variables. The letting go was what bothered him. It spoke of something he had not expected to find in a teenage pirate from East Blue, something that sat in a category he'd reserved for very few people in his 20 years of service. Judgment. The exercise of it, clean and unperformed, in a moment when the easier and more satisfying option was readily available. He stood at the window and looked at the sea for a long time. Then he picked up a pen and a piece of paper, and wrote a name and a destination, and folded it, and held it for a moment before sealing it. He didn't send it by messenger. He put on his civilian coat, gray, unremarkable, the coat of a man who could walk through a market without anyone looking twice, and carried it himself to the harbor, where he gave it to a private courier, and watched the courier's boat leave. The letter was addressed to himself, at a port 3 days' sail along the Straw Hat's projected route. The message inside was a reminder: go alone. No fleet. Talk first. He'd learned, 20 years ago, that the most dangerous thing you could do with fire was throw water on it all at once. Sometimes you had to sit with it. Sometimes you had to understand what it was burning for before you could make any decision about whether it should be allowed to burn. He went back inside and began making preparations for an unexpected leave of absence, and the sea outside continued doing what it always did, everything, all at once, for everyone, with complete impartial indifference. 3 days behind his letter, the Going Merry sailed on. Chapter 5. The Admiral's Gambit. The island of Calder was the kind of place the Grand Line produced occasionally, a town big enough to have a market, a proper harbor, 3 taverns, and the infrastructure of a place that had decided to exist at the intersection of enough shipping lanes to stay relevant without being important enough to attract the wrong kind of attention. It had good food, cheap docking fees, and a population that had collectively developed the talent of not asking questions about the people who passed through. The Straw Hats arrived on a Tuesday, which was market day, which meant the harbor was loud and crowded and the streets were full of exactly the kind of organized chaos that made 4 pirates resupplying look like background detail. Luffy went to find food. This was not a decision so much as a physical inevitability. The moment the Mary docked, he was off the ship and moving toward the smell of grilled meat with the focused momentum of a compass finding north, and Nami called after him something about staying visible and not causing incidents, which he heard in the general sense but not the specific. Zoro went to find a weapon shop. He came back 40 minutes later having not found a weapon shop but having found something better, which was a man on a side street who sold single blades from a blanket and had one with an interesting weight distribution that Zoro examined for 20 minutes before buying without apparent negotiation, though he paid significantly less than the asking price. The man selling it seemed fine with this in the specific way people became fine with things when the alternative was unclear. Usopp and Nami took the supply list to the market. Nami moved through market stalls with the particular efficiency of someone who had grown up needing to extract maximum value from minimum resources, which meant she spent 40 minutes acquiring 4 hours' worth of supplies at a price that left 3 separate vendors mildly confused about what had just happened to them. Luffy found a table at an open-air eating stall near the harbor, ordered everything, and ate half of it before noticing the man sitting 2 tables over. He was reading a newspaper. This was not the strange part. The strange part was the coat, gray, plain, unremarkable, the coat of a man who wanted to be background, and the way he was sitting, which was the way people sat when they'd had a long time to practice looking relaxed without actually relaxing. His hands on the newspaper were still. His eyes moved across the page at the pace of someone who had already read it, and was reading it again for a different reason. He was, Luffy thought, very specifically trying to look like nobody, which meant he was somebody. Luffy looked at him with his full open attention and ate 3 more skewers of meat and kept looking. The man turned a page of the newspaper. He didn't look up. But his hands, briefly, were not as still as they'd been, and the tiny adjustment in the angle of his shoulders said, in the body language of someone who had spent a long time being very observant, "I know you're looking." "You want some?" Luffy said. The man looked up from the newspaper. His face was exactly what Luffy had expected from everything else about him, a composed face, the kind that had been composed for long enough that it was the default, not the effort. Silver hair, cut short. Eyes that were the particular gray of deep water, the color of something that went a long way down. Mid-50s, maybe older, with the quality of someone whose age existed mostly as information rather than as physical fact. "No thank you," he said. "Sit over here then," Luffy said, gesturing at the bench across from him. "It's weird when you're over there." A very brief pause. The man folded his newspaper precisely, set it on the table, and moved to the bench across from Luffy with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had already decided to do this and didn't need the pretense of being invited. "You knew I was here," the man said. "Not until I sat down," Luffy said. "But you knew I was here before that." "Yes." Luffy ate another skewer. He looked at the man across the table, at the civilian coat, at the hands that sat flat on the table with the particular stillness of trained hands at rest, at the eyes that were doing something complicated and patient. "You're the Admiral," he said. The man looked at him. "What makes you say that?" "Corsair said someone senior needed to see the reports," Luffy said. "The frigates from Vresh sent reports before they left. If someone senior came personally, without a fleet, that's either stupid or confident, and you don't look stupid." He tilted his head. "Also, you carry yourself like someone who's used to people getting out of the way." "Most people don't notice that," the man said. "I notice things," Luffy said. "I just don't look like I do." Something moved in the Admiral's expression, the hairline crack in a composed surface, the motion of something being revised. He reached into his coat and placed a small flat object on the table between them. It was a Marine ID, the kind that only existed in the top 3 ranks. Crestfall. Fleet Admiral's Office. Admiral, First Class. Luffy looked at it. Then he picked up another skewer. "Okay," he said. "What do you want to talk about?" Crestfall had prepared for this conversation for 3 days on the ship here, and he was, he acknowledged to himself, not fully prepared. He had prepared for a boy. Specifically, for the kind of boy who appeared in these waters occasionally, bold, loud, running on conviction and not much else, the kind of person whose power outpaced their wisdom and whose certainty was the certainty of someone who hadn't yet encountered anything large enough to shake it. He dealt with those. He knew what to do with those. What was sitting across from him eating grilled meat and watching him with the unclouded attention of someone who had genuinely nothing to hide was not that. "You know why I'm here," Crestfall said. "You want to understand me," Luffy said. "Before you decide what to do." "Yes." "Why not just send the fleet?" "Because I've seen what happens when you send a fleet after the wrong kind of fire," Crestfall said. "You make it bigger." Luffy considered this while finishing his skewer. He set it down, picked up his cup, and drank, and looked at Crestfall over the rim with the open assessment he gave to everything. "What's the right kind of fire?" he said. "The kind that burns itself out," Crestfall said. "Most pirates are that kind. Ambition, charisma, a devil fruit, a crew, they go hard for a year, 2 years, and then they meet something they can't beat, or they make a mistake, or the sea takes them. The Grand Line has a way of selecting." He paused. "You're not that kind." "No," Luffy agreed. "Which makes you a problem that doesn't have a shelf life," Crestfall said. "Which is a different problem entirely." Luffy set his cup down. He was, Crestfall noticed, completely comfortable, not the performed ease of someone trying to appear unintimidated, but genuine comfort, the comfort of a person who had never organized their interior life around the question of what the most powerful person in the room thought of them. It was, if he was honest, somewhat extraordinary. He'd sat across tables from pirate captains and crime lords and 3 different warlords, and every single one of them had brought a specific quality of tension to the conversation, even the ones who were hiding it well. This boy was just eating lunch. "Can I ask you something?" Luffy said. "Yes." "You were a pirate." Crestfall was very still. "What makes you think that?" "The way you talked about fire," Luffy said. "You know what it feels like from the inside. People who've only ever fought pirates talk about them from the outside. You talked about it like," he searched, "like you know the difference between a thing that burns and a thing that shines." The silence that followed had a texture to it, the texture of something being handled carefully, something with an edge on it. Crestfall looked at the table. Outside, the market noise continued its cheerful indifference to the conversation happening inside the stall. Vendors, buyers, children, the normal percussion of a Tuesday. 26 years ago," Crestfall said. "For 4 years. East Blue mostly. I was 16 when I started and 20 when I stopped." A pause. "My crew was killed. Not by Marines. By a pirate with more power than sense who decided the sea he was sailing was his and everyone in it was his to do with as he liked." His voice was level throughout this, the levelness of a thing that had been processed past the point of heat into something colder. "I joined the Marines because the world needed people willing to stop that from happening. I've spent 20 years being right about that." "You stopped a lot of bad people," Luffy said. "Yes. And some good ones." Crestfall looked at him. "The system is imperfect," he said, with the specific weariness of a man who had made that particular peace with that particular imperfection many years ago, and was tired of arriving at it fresh each time someone made him look at it. "Gold Roger wasn't bad," Luffy said. A pause. "Roger was complicated," Crestfall said. "He was free," Luffy said. "And the world has been trying to put that back in the bottle ever since he let it out." He wasn't arguing. His voice had the flat, simple quality of someone stating a geography, describing the shape of the landscape, not fighting about it. "Shanks talked about him sometimes. Not much. But enough." "Shanks," Crestfall said. Something moved in his expression, recognition, something more complicated than recognition. "You know red-haired Shanks. He's the reason I'm doing this," Luffy said, and touched the brim of his hat without thinking, the automatic gesture, and Crestfall saw it, and understood it completely. The weight that the hat carried, the specific gravity of a debt that moved a person across oceans. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a vendor was selling something fragrant, spices, maybe, something warm and complicated. The market noise rose and fell. "What do you want, Luffy?" Crestfall said. The name came out naturally, without the title, without the threat, and Crestfall noticed this himself with a kind of remove, the part of himself that watched what he did and registered departures from pattern. Luffy looked at him. "I want to be king of the pirates," he said. "What does that mean to you?" "It means I've sailed all of it," Luffy said. "And the people I care about can do whatever they want. And the sea is open." He paused. "What does it mean to you?" "A threat," Crestfall said, with complete honesty. The single largest threat to world stability the system is aware of. Someone who can't be contained, can't be bought, and has a power we don't have a classification for yet. He looked at Luffy's hands on the table, the hands that crackled quietly when he was in motion, still now, just hands. And apparently is 17 years old and hasn't finished lunch. Luffy looked down at the remaining food. He picked up another skewer. You should eat something, he said. Conversations are better with food. Despite everything, despite 20 years of marine discipline and the specific emotional austerity of a man who had converted grief into professional purpose, Crestfall felt the thing that happened in him when something exceeded his expectation by enough, a small interior movement, involuntary, the beginning of something he hadn't intended to feel. He signaled the vendor. What's good? He said. Everything, Luffy said. Get the rice. They talked for 2 hours. Not strategically. That was the thing that kept catching Crestfall off guard, that there was nothing strategic about how Luffy talked. He didn't deflect or position or manage. He answered questions directly, asked his own with equal directness, and the conversation moved between the personal and the political and back again with the ease of two people who had, and probably, found a frequency they could both operate on. Crestfall talked about the Void Century, not the details, because he didn't have them, but the weight of the unknown in the world's history, the specific instability of a foundation built over something no one was allowed to examine. Luffy listened. He didn't have much to say about the Void Century, but he listened the way he always listened, with his full attention, not building his response while the other person was still talking. Luffy talked about East Blue, about Shanks, about the barrel and the sea and the gum-gum fruit and the 7 years of training on an island where nothing much happened. He talked about the lightning with the frank openness of someone who had no particular interest in concealing it. It was always there, he said. I just didn't know it yet. The gum-gum fruit shouldn't have produced lightning, Crestfall said. Not by any theory we have about how devil fruits interact with the body. I know, Luffy said. So what is it? Luffy thought about the harbor master on Bella saying something went somewhere, drifted. He thought about sitting on the hilltop while the 300-year storm found him and recognized him. He thought about the little girl by the spring saying it's alive. Something that was waiting to be found. He said. I think it drifted into the fruit a long time ago. And when I ate the fruit, it came too. He held one hand up, palm out, and the lightning turned over quietly in his palm. It's mine. I'm certain of that. But I don't think it started that way. Crestfall looked at the lightning for a long time. The operational question, he said slowly, is whether I believe that your freedom is compatible with the world's stability. And? Luffy said. And I don't know yet, Crestfall said, with the same complete honesty. Which is why I'm sitting here instead of at the head of a fleet. Fair, Luffy said. But I'll tell you what I do know. Crestfall leaned forward slightly. The world government is not going to let this continue. Vresh reached HQ in 12 hours. The warlord situation is going to require a response, and that response is going to come from above my pay grade, which means from people who are less interested in conversations than I am and more interested in solutions. He looked at Luffy directly. I can give you time. A few weeks, maybe more. I can manage the reports, slow the response. But eventually someone is going to come after you with everything available. I know, Luffy said. And you're not going to run. No. Because it would mean abandoning the people you've already helped. Because I'm not afraid of what comes, Luffy said. And running away from things I'm not afraid of is embarrassing. Crestfall looked at him. The market noise outside had settled into the quieter register of mid-afternoon, the busy morning crowd thinning to the steady regular traffic of a day's second half. The stall around them had half emptied. Somewhere outside a child was laughing, the specific high bright laugh of a very young child who had found something wonderful. What happened to you? Crestfall said quietly. When Keel had the sea prism stone on you. Luffy looked at his hands. It cut me off, he said. From the rubber. Devil fruits and sea prism interact wrong, it's like. He searched. Like being in a room where all the doors are locked and you can't feel the walls. Your own body gets strange. And the lightning came out anyway. The lightning isn't the fruit, Luffy said. The sea prism cuts off the fruit's power. It doesn't cut off me. He looked up. That's what Keel found out. Crestfall absorbed this carefully. It was the thing that had been at the back of all the reports, the thing that made the Straw Hat situation categorically different from every other high-powered pirate case he managed. The lightning wasn't a devil fruit power. It wasn't something you could nullify with Sea Prism. It wasn't something that had a standard counter. It was the boy. I need you to understand something, Crestfall said. The people above me, the celestial dragons, the system that the Marines ultimately serve, they are not interested in whether you're good. They are interested in whether you can be controlled. He paused. And everything about you suggests you can't. I can't, Luffy confirmed. That is going to put a lot of people in harm's way, Crestfall said. People who have nothing to do with you. Civilians, sailors, people in ports like this one. Luffy's expression didn't change, exactly, but it deepened, the way a color deepens when the light behind it intensifies. I know, he said. That's the part one think about. And the answer isn't to stop, Luffy said. The answer is to be fast enough and strong enough that the people above you don't get the chance to use civilians as leverage. He looked at Crestfall steadily. That's why I'm not hiding. That's why I'm not being careful about my power. The faster I get strong, the fewer people in the middle. Crestfall was quiet for a long time. That's, he said, a surprisingly coherent strategic position for someone who just ate 6 skewers of meat. 8. Luffy corrected. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. Looser, the tension in it shifted to something else, something that was not quite the absence of tension but was tension doing a different job. Crestfall looked at his rice, which he'd barely touched, and picked up the chopsticks. Tell me about your crew, he said. Luffy looked at him, slightly surprised by the direction. Then he settled back on the bench with the easy comfort of someone discussing a favorite subject. Zoro wants to be the greatest swordsman in the world. He's going to get there. A pause. Nami wants to map the whole world. She already understands the Grand Line better than people who've been sailing it for years. Another pause, warmer. Usopp is brave in the way that counts. Not the way that looks impressive. The way that shows up when it's hard. Crestfall listened. He ate his rice. They matter to you, he said. Yeah. So when the fleet comes, they'll be fine. Luffy said in a tone that wasn't bravado, the tone that was simply certainty, clean and without ornamentation. Crestfall looked at him across the table, at this boy who was going to be an enormous problem, who had already dismantled 2 situations that should have taken months and a fleet to resolve, who had talked to a warlord and an admiral on the same island chain without changing his posture or his tone, who was sitting here eating lunch as though the conversation was a pleasant way to spend a Tuesday afternoon and not a negotiation about the direction of the next decade of the world's history. I'm not going to help you, Crestfall said. When it comes to that. I need you to know that clearly. I serve the Marines. I believe in what the Marines are supposed to be, even when what they are falls short of that. If I'm ordered to bring you in, I'll try to bring you in. I know, Luffy said. And I won't go easy on you. I know that too. I just... Crestfall paused, working towards something. I wanted to understand who you were before that happened. Because I've been in this work long enough to know that the person across from you matters. What they want, what they're protecting, what they're willing to do. He set down his chopsticks. You're the first pirate I've met in 20 years who I couldn't find a cynical explanation for. Luffy looked at him. What's the non-cynical explanation? That you mean exactly what you say, Crestfall said. Exactly. Without qualification. Without hidden motive. You want to be free, and you want the people you care about to be free, and you're willing to fight the whole world for that. He paused. It's... Another pause, the word clearly not what he'd intended to use. It's what I wanted once. The afternoon sat between them. You could still want it, Luffy said. I'm 53, Crestfall said. So? It's complicated. Most things are, Luffy said. That doesn't mean they're impossible. Crestfall looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked away, at the harbor visible past the stall's awning, at the ships, at the particular angle of the afternoon light on the water that turned it from blue to a deep amber gold, and something in his expression did something that it probably hadn't done in a very long time, which was let go, briefly, of all the decisions it was holding. He picked up his chopsticks again. When my fleet comes, he said carefully, and it will come, I want you to know that I'm not your enemy. I know, Luffy said. But I'm not your friend either. I know that too, Luffy said. But you ate lunch with me. That's something. He was gone before Nami and Usopp got back to the harbor. The stall was empty except for Luffy, who was on his fourth cup of something warm and had eaten the rest of Crestfall's rice, and he told them who he'd been talking to with the same casual directness he used for everything. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds before Nami said very calmly, An admiral. Yeah, Luffy said. Came here alone. Yeah. To talk to you? Yeah. And you just talked to him. He had the rice, Luffy said. Nami sat down on the bench across from him, in the exact seat Crestfall had occupied, and put her face in her hands for a moment. Then she looked up. What did he say? Luffy gave her the summary, tribute, Vresh reaching HQ, the fleet that was coming. He gave it without particular dramatic weight, just the information in the order it had come. Nami processed this. Her navigator's mind was already moving through the implications, he could see it, the calculations running behind her eyes, the route adjustments, the timing. How long? She said. He said weeks, Luffy said. Maybe more. If an admiral is here, the fleet isn't far behind, she said. He came alone, Luffy said. No fleet. Yet, she said. Usopp was sitting at the edge of the table with the expression of a man who has just been given information he needs more time to process than the conversation is going to allow. An admiral came alone, he said slowly. To a market stall. To have lunch. With you. He talked a lot, Luffy said. He was sad about something, I think. A long time ago. Nami looked at him. You felt sorry for him. A little, Luffy said. He's on the wrong side, but he thinks he's on the right one. That's different from just being wrong. She was quiet for a moment. Did he tell you anything useful? The world government is above him, Luffy said. When it comes down to it. The Marines are supposed to protect people, but what they actually protect is the system. And the system is the celestial dragons. He said it with the even, uncomplicated clarity of someone who has just had a piece of the world's structure explained to him in terms that made it finally make sense. That's what he's carrying. He's trying to do the right thing inside something that doesn't always point that direction. Nami was quiet for a long time. That's perceptive, she said. He was honest, Luffy said. So I listened. She looked at him across the table in the half-empty stall in the afternoon light of a market island in the Grand Line, and she felt, not for the first time, the particular quality of being in the presence of someone who was going to change the world, not because they were trying to but because they couldn't stop being what they were. We should leave tonight, she said. Get ahead of any Marine response to the Vresh reports. Okay, Luffy said. And Luffy, yeah? Next time you have lunch with an admiral, she said, tell me first. He grinned. He was already there when I sat down. Tell me before you sit down. Okay, he said agreeably in the tone of a man who fully intended to comply with this instruction right up until the moment he forgot about it. Zoro found out about the admiral the same way he found out about most things. Someone mentioned it once, he filed it. He didn't comment extensively. He was sharpening his new blade on the Mary's deck when Luffy sat down near him and they were quiet together for a while, which was one of the things Luffy and Zoro did well. He's going to come after us, Zoro said. Not a question. Eventually, Luffy said. And we fight him. Yeah. Zoro ran the whetstone along the blade in a long, smooth stroke. Strong? Yes, Luffy said, and meant it, not with apprehension but with the clean acknowledgement of a real fact. Very strong. Experienced. He knows how to fight people with unusual abilities. He's been doing it for 20 years. Good, Zoro said. Luffy looked at him. You're excited. I want to see what you can do, Zoro said, against someone who's actually trying. Luffy looked out at the harbor, at the evening light making the water bronze, and the lightning in his chest did the thing it sometimes did when the conversation touched the right frequency, a brief surge, warm and electric, like something waking up to pay attention. I've been thinking about the rubber and the lightning, Luffy said. Separately I know what they do. Together I've only done it a couple of times. On Keel. On Corsair. He held out one hand, rubber and electricity playing over it simultaneously. There's something there I haven't found yet. What does it feel like? Zoro said. Luffy thought about it. Like there's a door I haven't opened. Zoro nodded once. He ran the whetstone along the blade again, the sound of it clean and rhythmic in the harbor air. Then open it, he said. Before the fleet shows up. They left Calder in the evening, the harbor lights small behind them as the Mary moved out into open water. The sky above them was clear and enormous, the first stars coming through, and the sea ahead was the dark gold of a world where something was always burning somewhere. Luffy was on the figurehead. The rest of the crew was settling into the familiar rhythms of a night at sea, Nami at the helm with her charts, Usopp doing something creative and possibly structural in the cargo hold, Zoro asleep with his swords across his lap and his back against the mast, which was approximately how Zoro spent most of his nights. The lightning in Luffy's chest was the same as always, the patient, warm second heartbeat, steady as the sea. But beneath it, since the conversation with Crestfall, since the Admiral's quiet words and the genuine weight of them, something else was building. Not urgency. Something more like readiness, the specific readiness of a thing that has been waiting in the right direction and now feels the distance to its destination getting shorter. He held his hands out over the water and let the lightning come. Full, unreserved, not the demonstration for Aldrich, not the cage breaking for Corsair, but the real amount of it, the amount that had been sitting in the waiting space since Mirror Shelf, the volume he could feel was there without quite having reached it yet. He pulled it from his chest down through his arms and out through his palms, and it came, branching and enormous, running off his hands and into the dark air above the water in long-reaching arcs, and for a moment the sea around the Mary was lit from above in the specific blue-white of a cloud-to-sea strike, the shadows running hard and clear across the water. It didn't feel like enough. That was the thing. All of this, and it still felt like he'd only opened the first door. Behind him, he heard Nami's sharp inhale. He closed his hands. The light died. The sea went back to dark and stars. Sorry, he said. Didn't mean to make it visible from the helm. I don't care about visible, she said, and her voice had the particular quality it got when she was trying to be purely practical, and something else was in the way. How much of that was you holding back? He thought about it honestly. Most of it, he said. A silence. Luffy, she said. Yeah. Crestfall is going to come with everything he has, she said. When he comes. I know. And you're going to be ready. It wasn't really a question. It was the navigator saying confirm position before committing to a course. He looked at the horizon. The dark sea ahead, the Grand Line's enormous patient presence, the weight of every island and every fight and every person still ahead of them, Alabasta, and everything beyond Alabasta, and beyond that the second half of the Grand Line, and somewhere at the far end of it all, the One Piece, and the thing that coming home would mean. He turned and looked at Nami. Her face in the helm's lamp was focused and serious, and there was something else in it too, something that wasn't fear but acknowledged the same territory fear acknowledged, the weight of what was coming, and the choice to sail toward it anyway. Yeah, he said. I'm going to be ready. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to her charts, and the Mary moved on, and the stars above them were the same stars above every sea in the world, indifferent and ancient and burning with the specific patience of things that had been waiting a very long time for the right story to happen underneath them. 3 days behind the Mary, Admiral Crestfall stood at the prow of his flagship as it left Calder's harbor, and looked at the direction the Straw Hats had gone, and felt the complicated weight of the thing he was carrying, the duty and the grief and the 20 years of decisions and the boy across the table who had meant exactly what he said. He had given them time. He would not give them more than he had. The fleet moved out, and the sea ahead of it was the same sea the Straw Hats sailed, and somewhere in the distance between them the Grand Line was already arranging the stage for what came next. Chapter 6: King of Storms. The fleet appeared on the horizon at dawn. Nami saw it first because Nami always saw things first. She was on the helm watch, the sky still the deep pre-light blue of early morning, when the shapes resolved out of the dark edge of the world. She counted masts. Stopped. Counted again. 14 ships. She didn't wake anyone immediately. She spent 30 seconds with her spyglass confirming what she was seeing: the marine flags, the formation, the flagship at the center that was larger than anything she'd seen outside of a naval history book, and then she did the precise, efficient thing of updating her internal calculation of how serious this was and cross-referencing it with everything she knew about what was on the Going Mary. And then she walked to the base of the mast and said, at normal volume, "Zoro." Zoro opened his eyes. 14 ships, she said. Northwest. Closing. He was on his feet in 2 seconds, hand on Wado Ikemanji, looking northwest. A pause. "That's a lot of ships." "Yes," Nami said. "Wake Luffy." "I'm going to," she said, already moving. She didn't need to. Luffy was sitting up on the figurehead, which was where he'd fallen asleep 3 hours ago and apparently stayed. He was looking northwest with both eyes open and the alert stillness of someone who'd woken not from a sound but from something else, the change in the air, maybe, the specific electrical quality of a morning that was going to be different from the ones before it. "I see them," he said. 14 ships, Nami said. "The flagship is Crestfalls," Luffy said. She stopped. "You can tell from here?" "The way it sits in the water," he said. "He's on it." He looked at the fleet for a moment longer and then turned and looked at his crew, Nami at the helm, Zoro at the mast, Usopp emerging from below with his goggles on and his kabuto in hand, having apparently woken himself up with the instinct of someone who had learned to sleep lightly in the Grand Line. All 3 of them looking at him. He grinned. It was the full grin, the one that took up his whole face, the one that said something was very big and very real and he was completely, utterly ready for it. "Okay," he said. "Let's go." "Go where?" Usopp said. "They're coming to us." "I know," Luffy said. He was already walking toward the stern. "I mean, let's not run. Let's meet them." He looked at Nami. "Turn the Mary toward them." Nami looked at him. She looked at the 14 ships. She looked at him again. "Turn the Mary toward the 14-ship Marine fleet," she said. "Yeah." She turned the Mary toward the 14-ship Marine fleet, because she had made a decision a long time ago on a different stretch of water that this was where she was going, and she was not the kind of person who unmade her decisions, and the Mary came around on a heading that pointed it directly at the center of the largest naval formation in this section of the Grand Line. "Right," Usopp said from behind his goggles, his voice in the register he used when he was frightened and doing it anyway. "Right, that's fine, we're doing that, I'm completely, Usopp," Zoro said. "Fine, I'm absolutely, Usopp." "What?" "Stop talking and get to your position," Zoro said. "You're better than you think you are." Usopp closed his mouth. He went to his position, the forward starboard rail, kabuto in hand, the star-shaped ammunition arranged in his bag with the focused care of someone who respected their tools. He didn't say anything else. He breathed, and steadied, and looked at the closing fleet, and was ready. Nami held the helm. She looked at the fleet and thought about her charts, about the route she'd been building since East Blue, about all the seas she hadn't mapped yet. Then she thought about Luffy saying Nami can map the whole world in the afternoon light on Mira's shelf, the complete matter-of-fact certainty of it, and something settled in her chest. Not calm, exactly, but the thing underneath panic that panic was covering, which was resolve. Zoro drew Wado Ikemanji. Just the one, resting across his shoulder, his other two swords sheathed. The morning light hit the blade and it was clean and cold and quiet. Luffy stood at the bow of the Mary. The fleet slowed as the Mary came toward it, which was the last thing its captains had apparently planned for. The tactical structure of a 14-ship formation was built around the assumption that the target would run, or hold position defensively, or do one of the several things that ships did when confronted with 14 times their own firepower. It was not built around a target sailing directly into the formation's center with the cheerful momentum of a ship that had somewhere to be. On the Crestfalls flagship, the admiral stood at the prow in full uniform, not the civilian coat of Calder, but the white marine coat, gold-trimmed, the coat of someone who was not here as himself today but as the office he represented. He watched the Mary come through his spyglass and saw the boy on the figurehead and felt the complicated interior movement of a man doing his duty and knowing exactly what it cost. "Hold position," he said to his captains. "Let them come to the center." "Admiral, standard procedure for a hostile approach," I said. "Hold," he said. Not loudly. Just finally. The fleet held. The Mary sailed into the center of it with the Going Mary's characteristic confidence, the sheep figurehead pointing forward, the Jolly Roger flying from the mast in the morning wind. It was, Crestfall thought, an extraordinarily small ship to have arrived at the center of a formation like this under its own power. He raised his voice across the water between the flagships. "Monkey D. Luffy!" Luffy looked up from the figurehead. "Crestfall. You understand what I'm here for?" "Yeah," Luffy said. "You're here to take me in." "That's right." "I'm not going," Luffy said. "I know," Crestfall said. A pause. The morning wind moved between the ships, rippling the flags on both sides, and the sea was very quiet in the way it got before large things happened. "I told you I wouldn't go easy," Crestfall said. "I know that too," Luffy said. "Are you going to come over here, or do I have to come over there?" Crestfall came over the water. He didn't take a boat. He moved across the surface using his devil fruit, the Gus fruit, a Logia type that Luffy hadn't known about until the moment it manifested, Crestfall's form dissolving at the edges into pressurized wind, moving across the 100 feet of water between the flagship and the Mary in 3 seconds and landing on the Mary's deck with a sound like a hard exhale. He was in full form. The wind that comprised his Logia state moved around him in a contained column, his features visible through it but his body not entirely solid, the specific half-material state of a Logia user operating at full power, where the physical form was both present and conditional. His eyes found Luffy immediately. "Your crew," he said. "I'll give you my word, if you fight me personally I'll hold the fleet back." "I know you will," Luffy said. He stepped off the figurehead onto the deck and rolled his shoulders, and the lightning in his chest surged up to meet the moment, warm and full and finally, completely unrestrained. He could feel the whole volume of it, the amount from Mira's shelf, the amount that had been building since Kiel, since the lightning hit the mast in the storm, since the mountain peak on Belu, everything accumulated and present and awake. The second heartbeat pounded. "You said you wanted to understand me first," Luffy said. "Before this." "I did understand you," Crestfall said. "That's the problem." He moved. The wind came first, not as a physical strike but as pressure, a contained wall of it, the kind of force that flattened everything horizontal in its path, and it hit the Mary's deck in a wave that sent ropes and rigging and everything not tied down skidding sideways. Nami caught the helm with both arms. Usopp planted his feet and leaned into it. Zoro didn't move at all, the 3 earrings catching the light as his head tilted slightly into the pressure like a stone tilts into a current. Luffy stood in it. The wind hit him and passed around him, rubber body absorbing and redirecting, the pressure finding no purchase, but the force of it was real enough that he took one step back before he stopped, and Crestfall was already inside the pressure wave, already moving through his own attack with the ease of a man who was made of the same substance, and his fist came through the dissipating wind and connected with Luffy's chest. It wasn't an iron fist. It wasn't Corsair's deadweight impact. This was pressurized wind concentrated to a point, a compressed column of air moving at the speed of a bullet, and it hit Luffy's rubber chest and the rubber absorbed it, and the kinetic energy converted and Luffy went backward, not stumbling, but launched, the Mary's full width in a clean arc that ended with his back hitting the stern railing hard enough to leave a dent. He bounced off it. "Good," he said, straightening up. Crestfall was watching him with the complete attention of a man who had fought a great many things and was genuinely uncertain about this one. "You absorbed that," he said. "The rubber converts impact to kinetic energy," Luffy said, and stretched his right arm back, letting it load. "It goes back out." He released. The recoil launched him across the deck in a straight line, a human projectile with all the momentum of the rubber's conversion stored in the forward motion, and he hit Crestfall in the center of the chest with a right hand that had the full rubber band force behind it, and under his skin, in the fist, the lightning was fully live. Logia bodies dispersed impact by becoming the material they were made of, become wind, the fist passes through. But the lightning didn't pass through. The lightning followed the wind, found the electrical charge in the compressed air of Crestfall's form, and conducted through it with the indifferent efficiency of electricity following a path. Crestfall's Logia form cracked. Not broke, cracked, the coherence of it disrupting for half a second, and in that half second he was solid, and solid meant the impact mattered. He absorbed it better than Corsair had. 20 years of experience, a different fruit with different physical properties, and the specific competence of a man who had been hit by very large things before and knew how to remain standing. But he moved backward 3 full steps, and the wind column around him spasmed and reformed, and his expression had changed. "That's new," he said. "I know," Luffy said. "The lightning conducts through wind." "Lightning conducts through a lot of things," Luffy said. He was moving again, bouncing on the balls of his feet with the rhythm he'd learned from 100 fights, not waiting, not settling, staying in motion. "I think everything has a path for it. I just have to find the path." Crestfall looked at him, and the complicated weight in his eyes was the weight of a man arriving at a conclusion he'd been building toward for 3 days. "You've been getting stronger since fresh," he said. "Not just practicing. Actually stronger. Every time I use it," Luffy said. "How much stronger?" Luffy thought about the door he'd described to Zoro, the sense of something beyond what he'd already found, the volume of the lightning that was still waiting. He thought about sitting by the spring in the dark and turning shapes in his palm and feeling the full amount of it for the first time. "A lot," he said. Crestfall straightened. The wind around him built, not the wall pressure from before, something deeper, something that pulled rather than pushed, drawing the air from the surrounding space inward toward his form until the Mary's sails were suddenly deflated and the flags went dead still, the air itself being consumed. A vacuum, localized, enormous. The kind of pressure differential that created its own weather, and at the center of it Crestfall was pure wind, no longer bothering with the human silhouette, just a column of compressed and moving air that contained something aware and determined. The vacuum reached critical mass and reversed. The air that had been drawn and released outward in a single circular wave, a storm breath, an omnidirectional blast that was not pressurized to a point but spread across the entire surface of the Mary simultaneously. And it was powerful enough that the ship itself lifted slightly on one side. Nami shouted something. Usopp went horizontal, caught the railing with one hand, and hung there. Zoro drove one sword into the deck and gripped the hilt with both hands and planted his feet and held position through pure physical stubbornness. Luffy was in the air. The blast had taken him up, not destructively, the rubber converting the omnidirectional force into upward motion, and he was 15 feet above the deck, rising, the Mary below him and the sea around it, and the 14-ship fleet in a ring and the open sky enormous above, and in that moment of rising he felt the complete inventory of himself. Rubber, which meant no impact could break him and every force was a resource. Lightning, which was his and was alive and had been waiting since before he was born for the person who could carry it. And below it all, in the place where most people kept their fear, just the clean simple fact of why he was here, the hat on his head and the crew on the deck below, and the sea ahead and the world, all of it, worth sailing toward. The door he described to Zoro. He found the handle. He pulled it open. The sky above the Mary changed. It didn't darken the way it had at Vresh. That was accumulation, pulling clouds in, building a storm from available material. This was different. This was the sky responding to something that was already there, the atmosphere recognizing the full volume of what Luffy was carrying and reorganizing itself around it. The clouds formed in a spiral center directly above the Mary, fast, enormous, the kind of cloud formation that in normal weather required hours of atmospheric buildup and was happening now in under a minute, and they were not gray but dark blue-black, the specific color of clouds that are made of contained lightning rather than moisture. Crestfall reformed his human shape. He stood on the deck and looked up, and his expression was the expression of a man who had prepared for many things and had prepared for something in this general category, but had not prepared for the specific scale. The crew of the fleet's outer ships were at their railings staring. Every officer with a spyglass had it pointed upward. The Mary sat under the forming spiral of its own private storm, and the air around it smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet, like a held breath, like the moment between the lightning and the thunder when the world is deciding what just happened. Luffy came down from his 15 feet. He dropped straight, not a combat landing, just a clean return to the deck, and he hit it, and straightened, and the lightning was everywhere, not running over his skin in patterns but standing off it, a corona that extended a foot in every direction, branching and rebranching continuously, and where it met the deck the wood darkened slightly at his feet, scorched in the specific fractal patterns of a lightning strike on a tree. He looked at Crestfall and the grin was gone. Not anger. Not the cold that some powerful people found in themselves when they reached their limit. Something more present than either. The expression of someone who was completely here, completely in this moment, everything else stripped away. It was, Crestfall thought, the expression of someone who loved what they were doing, not the fight specifically but the being fully alive that the fight required. "You're going to have to actually try," Luffy said. Crestfall looked at the storm above the Mary. He looked at the boy standing in his own lightning. He looked at his fleet, 14 ships, every cannon, every trained soldier, every resource the marine system had authorized him to deploy, and he made the calculation that a man with 20 years of experience makes: quick, comprehensive, honest. "The fleet," he said. "Can you hold back long enough for them to?" "I'm not going to hurt your fleet," Luffy said. "I'm not angry at your fleet. The people on those ships are just people." He looked past Crestfall at the 14 ships. "But I'm going to stop you. That's what this is." "Then show me," Crestfall said. He dissolved completely. The wind form dropped the pretense of human shape and spread, not outward but upward, into the sky, into the clouds that Luffy had formed, dispersing through the enormous volume of the spiral storm and filling it, occupying it, the gust fruit at full extension, a Logia Admiral making himself coextensive with a storm, the most powerful form the ability allowed, where his consciousness and his power occupied the weather system itself. The Mary was surrounded by him. He was the wind in the sails, the pressure in the clouds, the moving air across the water. His voice came from everywhere. "This is what 20 years looks like," he said. The storm contracted inward. The pressure hit the Mary from all sides simultaneously, not a wall but a sphere, a compression closing from every direction, and Nami was yelling numbers at Usopp about hull stress, and Usopp was doing something structural and fast, and Zoro had his 3 swords out now and was directing his haki outward against the pressure in the specific way he did when physical resistance was the only available tool. Luffy stood at the center of it, and held his arms out to his sides. He thought about the spring on Mira's shelf. About how the lightning followed paths. About the storm on the way to Vresh and the bolt that hit the mast, and how he'd reached for it, and it had come to him because they were part of the same system. He thought about the little girl saying it's alive and the harbor master on Bella saying something went somewhere, drifted in Crestfall at the lunch table saying it's what I wanted, once in Shanks, years ago in East Blue, laughing at something with his head back and his red hair bright in the sun, the image so old it had the texture of a dream. The lightning in his chest was fully open now. All of it, every door, the complete volume. And it was enormous. It was so much larger than anything he'd used before that for a moment the only thing he felt was the scale of it, the way you feel the depth of the sea when you're in it rather than looking at it from above. He reached into Crestfall's storm. Not to fight it. To find him in it. To find the specific frequency of Crestfall's consciousness in the distributed wind, the particular signature of a person moving through their own power. It was the same kind of listening he'd done on Bella's Peak, the same grammar, the language the lightning shared with all electrical and atmospheric things. He sent the lightning into the wind the way lightning always moved through air, following the path of least resistance, branching, finding every available route, and at each branch point choosing the direction of greater charge, the direction of the person. Crestfall felt it coming. He tried to disperse further, to spread so thin there was no concentration for the lightning to find. But consciousness required concentration. A Logia user was always still themselves, even fully dispersed. The self was the irreducible point. Luffy found it. He didn't describe what happened next in terms anyone around him had vocabulary for. He gathered the full volume of the lightning, everything, the whole accumulated weight of it, the amount from every storm and every fight and every midnight practice by every spring and peak and harbor, and he sent it into Crestfall's storm in a single continuous branching discharge that filled the spiral cloud above the Mary from edge to center. The storm lit up. All of it, every cloud, every cubic foot of the atmospheric spiral, lit from inside in a single sustained pulse of blue-white light that turned the early morning into noon and kept it there, and the sound of it was not a crack but a sustained rolling peal that crossed the water and hit the fleet's outer ships and kept going, rolling outward across the Grand Line in every direction like the sea announcing something. Inside the lit storm, Crestfall's dispersed form was hit with every branching path of lightning simultaneously. It was not destructive. Luffy had not wanted to destroy him, had specifically held the temperature of it below the threshold where it became something else. But it was overwhelming, the specific overwhelming of a system receiving more input than it could process while maintaining its current distributed state. The gust fruit concentrated. Involuntarily. The dispersed storm collapsed inward under the lightning's input, Crestfall's consciousness pulling everything back to a single point because that was the only way to maintain coherence under that kind of uniform pressure, and the single point formed above the Mary's deck and resolved into a solid form. Solid, human. The Admiral standing on the deck with his white coat burning at the edges and his silver hair disheveled and both hands out to his sides, breathing hard, real, unable to disperse. The lightning faded from the clouds. The storm dissolved, not with drama but with the quiet release of the Bella Peak storm, the same grammar, the same letting go. The clouds moved apart, and the morning light came back, ordinary and warm and honest. The fleet was completely silent. Every ship. Every sailor. Not a cannon, not a voice, not a movement at any railing. Crestfall stood on the Mary's deck and looked at Luffy. He was solid and breathing, and the white coat was scorched along the shoulder, and his expression was the expression of a man who had arrived at the end of a very long road and found something waiting at the end of it that was not what he'd expected. Not defeat, exactly. Understanding. You held back, he said. Yeah, Luffy said. The corona of lightning was gone, the storm gone, just the boy in the straw hat standing in the morning light. The second heartbeat was steady and quiet. You're not my enemy. I told you that. I told you I wasn't your friend either. I know, Luffy said. But you ate lunch with me. Something in Crestfall's face did the thing it had done at the table, the letting go, brief and involuntary, the 20 years of composed professional surface showing what was underneath it. You can't beat everything you're going to face like this, he said. There are things ahead of you, people, systems, that won't stop because you held back. I know, Luffy said. For them I won't. And the world government, is a problem for later, Luffy said. Right now it's just you and me and 14 ships. He looked past Crestfall at the fleet. Tell them to go. Crestfall looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the scorched deck, at the dispersed clouds, at the morning sky that was clean and wide and full of light. He looked at the crew behind Luffy, the navigator who'd held the helm through an admiral-scale storm, the swordsman who'd planted his blade in the deck and held his ground, the marksman who'd stayed at his position when the smarter move was horizontal. He turned to face his fleet. Stand down, he said. His voice carried across the water with the authority of 20 years. All ships. Weapons down. We are standing down. The fleet captains heard it. There was a moment, the particular hesitation of trained people receiving an order that conflicts with the situation they believe they're in, and then the marine discipline took over, and across 14 ships the posture shifted, the weapons went from ready to resting, and the enormous armored formation became, simply, a collection of ships in the water. Crestfall turned back to Luffy. I'm going to report this accurately, he said. Everything I saw. What you can do. What you chose not to do. He paused. It's not going to make the people above me less afraid of you. I know, Luffy said. It might make some of them more afraid. I know that too. You're going to have a very large bounty, Crestfall said. Luffy grinned. How large? Crestfall looked at the scorched deck, the dispersed admiral-scale storm, the 14 ships he just ordered to stand down. Very, he said. Luffy's grin widened. Crestfall left the same way he'd arrived, across the water, the wind form carrying him back to his flagship with the directional efficiency of a man who had accomplished what he'd come to accomplish, even if what he'd accomplished was not what he'd planned. His white coat was still scorched at the shoulder. He did not repair it before he reached the flagship. The fleet formed up around the flagship and began its turn, slow, coordinated, the professional geometry of a naval force that knew how to execute a withdrawal with the same precision it executed an advance. Within 20 minutes they were a formation moving southwest. Within an hour they were shapes on the horizon. Within 2 hours they were gone. The Mary sat alone on the open Grand Line water in the full morning light. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Usopp sat down very suddenly on the deck with his legs out in front of him and said, "Okay," and then said nothing else because nothing else seemed necessary. Zoro sheathed his swords. He looked at the scorched deck around where Luffy had been standing. The fractal lightning patterns burned into the wood, branching outward in the shapes the current had taken, a permanent record of what had happened here. He looked at them for a long moment. "You opened it," he said. "The thing you described. The door." "Yeah," Luffy said. "What's on the other side?" Luffy thought about it. He thought about the full volume of the lightning, the scale of it, the way it had felt to send it into the storm, not like using a weapon but like speaking in a language that the sky already knew. He thought about what Crestfall had said, "There are things ahead of you that won't stop." "More doors," he said. Zoro nodded. Satisfied. Nami came from the helm. She walked across the deck to Luffy, directly, with the navigator's straight-line efficiency, and she stopped in front of him and looked at his face, checking, the way she checked everything, for the real condition underneath the reported one. He was fine. He was actually fine, which she could tell because Luffy being fine and Luffy pretending to be fine were completely distinguishable things, and this was the real version. She reached out and adjusted his hat. It had gotten tilted in the fight, the brim slightly wrong, and she straightened it with 2 fingers and then dropped her hand and looked at him steadily. "We're going to need a bigger ship," she said. He laughed, the full one, the body-shaking laugh, and the sound of it went out across the water, bright and enormous, and somewhere above them, in the clean sky where the storm had been, a single thread of heat lightning crossed the blue and was gone. "Yeah," he said. "Let's find one." They sailed through the morning and into the afternoon with the Grand Line doing what the Grand Line did, the weather shifting through 3 different systems before noon, a brief period where the compass did something interesting and Nami spent 45 focused minutes correcting their course. An island visible to the east that wasn't on her charts, and that Luffy immediately wanted to investigate, and that she marked for later with the specific precision of a cartographer who had a running list. Usopp repaired the deck where the lightning had scorched it, or attempted to, and the repair was structurally sound even if it was aesthetically its own thing. He stood back and looked at the fractal pattern burned into the wood beneath the patch and decided to leave a section of it exposed. A small window in the repair, the lightning shape preserved, the Mary wearing the record of the morning the way a tree wears the record of a hard year in its rings. Zoro sat against the mast and sharpened all 3 swords in sequence. He did this after significant fights, not because they needed it, necessarily, but because it was the physical form of reviewing what had happened, processing it in the language of blades. Today he was moving slowly, thinking about the thing Luffy had done in the sky above the Mary, the scale of it, and what that scale implied about where they were going and what they were going to find. He'd said he wanted to see what Luffy could do against someone who was actually trying. He'd seen it now. He turned the implications of it over the way he turned a blade edge, looking for what he needed to learn, what he needed to get sharper at to stay worth being beside someone who could do that. He'd need to be much better than he was. Good, he thought. He'd need a reason. Nami found Luffy on the figurehead in the late afternoon, which was where she generally found him, the consistency of it long since having moved from coincidence to architecture. She had her logbook. She sat on the Mary's bow beside the figurehead with her legs folded and the logbook open, and for a while she wrote the day's coordinates, the weather events, the fleet departure, the fight itself described in the dry notational language of a navigator's log, which somehow made the extraordinary things of the day feel more real rather than less, more permanent, as though the act of writing them fixed them into the record of the world. She could feel the lightning from here. Not see it, it wasn't active, just resting, but feel it, the warmth of it, the specific quality of the air near Luffy, the way a room feels different when a fire is burning in it even with your eyes closed. What did it feel like? She asked. When you sent it into his storm. He was quiet for a moment. Like the whole sky was mine, he said. For a second. She looked up from the logbook. He was watching the horizon with the standard Luffy horizon attention, the forward-pointing focus, but there was something in it today, an additional quality, the quality of someone who has seen the next distance marker and has updated their sense of how far the road goes. Was it? She started. Not scary, he said. I know that's what you're going to ask. No. I was going to ask if it was lonely, she said. He looked at her. The surprise in his face was brief but complete, the genuine unguarded surprise of Luffy receiving something he hadn't seen coming. Lonely? Being the only thing that big, she said. In that moment. Whether it felt. She paused, finding the word. Separate. He thought about it. His hand went to the brim of his hat, not adjusting it this time, just holding it against the wind. No, he said finally. Because I could feel you. All of you. The whole time. He looked at her directly. That's the thing I couldn't describe before. When the lightning goes out, into the storm, into the ground, into wherever, it doesn't take me with it. I can always feel where I am. Because of. He gestured, a small motion that encompassed the deck, the ship, the people on it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at her logbook and wrote something, not coordinates, not weather. Something in the margin, in the smaller handwriting she used for things that were for herself and not for navigation. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They stayed on the bow as the afternoon went golden and then amber, and then the particular deep orange of a Grand Line evening, which always went further into color than East Blue sunsets had, as though the Grand Line sky understood drama and couldn't resist it. Over dinner, Nami cooked, which meant it was competent and practical and served with the disclaimer that she was a navigator and not a cook and they needed to find a cook, which they agreed with completely every time she cooked and then forgot about immediately afterward. The conversation found its way to what came next. Alabasta region, Nami said, spreading the chart on the table between the dishes. There are things happening there that have been in the marine reports I've collected. Something with the country's stability, internal conflict, a figure calling themselves Crocodile working through an organization called Baroque Works. She paused. Warlord level. Another warlord, Usopp said, in the tone of a man updating his running tally. A different kind, Nami said. Not like Corsair. More organized. More political. Whatever's happening in Alabasta isn't just tribute extraction, it's deeper, structural. Someone trying to take apart a country from the inside. She looked at Luffy. We should go, Luffy said. Obviously, Zoro said. I wasn't suggesting we shouldn't, Nami said. I was suggesting we go knowing what we're going into rather than sailing directly into the middle of it and improvising, which is our current default approach and which has been working it's been working, Luffy said agreeably. Is not a strategy, Nami said. We'll figure it out when we get there, Luffy said. That's the opposite of what I just said. We'll figure it out when we get there, Luffy said again, in exactly the same tone, not as repetition but as a settled position, and Nami looked at him and then looked at Zoro, who raised one shoulder in the single-shouldered shrug that meant this is what we signed up for, and Usopp was already nodding with the resigned conviction of someone who had learned that the plan being figuring it out when you got there had a better track record than it had any right to. After dinner, after the charts were folded and the dishes were cleared, after Usopp had gone below and Zoro had returned to his spot against the masts with his swords, Nami stayed at the table with her tea going cold and her small logbook open to the margin where she'd written the thing she'd written earlier. She read it once. Then she closed the logbook and looked at the dark water through the Mary's porthole and felt the weight of everything that had happened in the weeks since they'd entered the Grand Line. The islands, the storms, the fights, the conversations, the morning's enormous sky-filling discharge of something that should not have existed but did, completely, undeniably, because it was Luffy's and Luffy was real. She thought about what he'd said. I can always feel where I am. Because of the small gesture. The ship. The crew. She thought about that for a long time. Later, when the ship was quiet and the stars were fully out and the Grand Line was doing its constant vast thing of containing everything worth knowing, Luffy sat on the figurehead alone. He held his hands in his lap, palms up, and looked at them. The lightning was quiet, the deepest quiet it had been in weeks, the quiet of something that had spent itself fully and was now simply resting. He could still feel the full volume of it, the whole weight of the thing he'd opened, and it would come when he called it now without any of the uncertainty or partial awakening of the early days. He thought about Crestfall standing on the deck with his scorched coat and his composed face. About the specific look of a man acknowledging something without being able to change it. About what he'd said, "It's what I wanted once." He thought about Shanks. About the hat on his head, the worn red straw, the weight of it. About a debt that moved you across oceans. About the specific shape of a dream that had been given to you by someone who believed you could carry it. He would give the hat back. He would give it back at the end, when the thing it represented was no longer a promise but a fact, when the sea was fully known and fully sailed and everything ahead was behind him, when the people he'd decided were his were doing whatever they wanted to do, when the world was exactly large enough to contain all of it. That was a long way from here. That was through Alabasta and beyond Alabasta and through the New World and beyond the New World, through every warlord and admiral and system that thought it was bigger than a boy with rubber and lightning who had decided that the world deserved better than what it currently had. The lightning in his chest did the thing it did when his thoughts found the right frequency. A brief warm surge, the second heartbeat strong and present. He looked at the horizon. The Grand Line was ahead of him, all of it, enormous and violent and full of every extraordinary thing the world had decided to keep in one place. The sea was dark and gold at the edges where the moonlight found it, and somewhere in those waters every island he hadn't visited yet was waiting, and every person he hadn't met yet was living their life, and every fight he hadn't won yet was coming. He couldn't wait. He pulled his hat down against the wind and grinned at the horizon with the full unreserved grin, the one that said something was very real and very large and he was completely, utterly, absolutely ready for it, and above him in the clear Grand Line sky, The stars were burning the way they'd burned for 1,000 years, patient and ancient, and indifferent to everything except the stories happening beneath them. The Going Merry sailed on. Storm clouds followed at a distance, not threatening, not building, just present, trailing behind the little white ship the way a cape trails behind someone who has somewhere important to be. Patient. Waiting. The sea opened ahead of them, and Monkey D. Luffy, Rubber Man and Stormcaller, future king of the pirates, 17 years old and just getting started, sailed into it without slowing down.